IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. It is August 12th, which means we are now under the 20-day mark until Notre Dame begins their 2025 season. They kick off in 19 days down in Miami inside a Hard Rock Stadium. And we are going to continue a lot of what we're doing in the offseason here. Today, we are going to be previewing the SEC. Now, similar to what we did yesterday, is we're going to start out by talking about what implications that has for Notre Dame. Because in recent seasons, Notre Dame has kind of picked up their performance, I guess you could say, against the SEC, and they've started to perform a little bit better, especially under this new regime with Marcus Freeman. But there were some little hints of it starting to turn around before he took over as head coach in 2022. And then afterwards, we're going to dive into our conference preview, looking at the conference as a whole, very similar to what we did yesterday. We're going over conference superlatives. We're going to be talking about offensive players of the year and defensive players of the year. And then, of course, we'll be breaking down who we believe to be top to bottom, where the teams are going to be ranked. But, Brian, it is another edition of our conference previews here, and this one's going to be another fun one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, Trevor, because obviously anytime you're talking about the SEC, it's going to spark some conversation, and it's going to spark some debate about, the dominance of the SEC and are they the best conference out there, and you get back into it. It's funny listening to SEC people make arguments that back up what I used to say as to why there were years they weren't the best league. And well, yeah, maybe we haven't won championships, but, just top to bottom. And I'm like, yeah, that your argument used to be, well, we've won X number of championships in a row. That was your argument. And now you're arguing the exact opposite of what the Big Ten used to say is, yeah, well, we're deeper back in the day. And so it is kind of funny to see how those things kind of, circle back and depending on who's dominating. But this is going to be an interesting year. We're going to have fun talking about it. But when you look at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, Trevor, obviously Notre Dame is scheduling more SEC teams in recent years. You've obviously had the series with Georgia. And when I say SEC, I'm talking about like real SEC teams, not like we go back and retroactively count the 2015 win over Texas as a SEC win. I don't care about that. I don't count the 2012 Oklahoma. 2012, we may have lost to Alabama, but we beat another SEC team. Oh yeah, who was that? Oklahoma. No, you beat a Big 12 team. They may be in the SEC now, but you beat a Big 12 team, and we did that with Stanford as well. We didn't count Stanford wins prior to 2024 when we talked about Notre Dame's record against the ACC because they were not ACC teams. But you're obviously last year when you talk about playing Texas A&M during the season, and then this year you're going to have a game against Texas A&M and Arkansas, and then of course Notre Dame last year. My buddy likes to say, Notre Dame's won a conference championship last year, and I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes like, yeah, they're the SEC champs, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. They beat the SEC champs, but then that would make Ohio State the SEC champs because they beat Texas and Notre Dame, and who beat, you know what I mean? So. But the point being, they've had more opportunities to kind of make some statements against the SEC, and they're making better statements than maybe they used to. And I think it matters, and that's what this first topic is going to be about. Trev is it is important to have success against the SEC on and off the field, because if you want to have the kind of roster that allows you to go and win championships, that's what it requires, because whether you agree with it or not, this is still the perceived best league in college football. It's still located where the majority of the best talent is located. If you want to get the best players, you still have to go against these schools to get them. And so having a track record of success against the better schools in that league and just the league overall, which we'll talk about, is important. So I'm excited about it. And then, man, our SEC prediction show is going to be fun because – like I went through it and marked wins, and I'm like, okay, that team's not going to be as good as I thought they were going to be, and it's going to be an interesting conversation, Trev, and I'm very, very much looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun day.
Agreed. I think you touched on a really good point, Brian. It's about perception, and I think the SEC is still kind of used as college football's measuring tool. You hear it in games all the time. You hear it in College Game Day all the time. Fox Big Noon Kickoff. They kind of use the SEC as a measuring tool to see how other teams stack up. How do they stack up against the SEC? Those are kind of the big headlines. You get some of that with teams in the Big Ten, but more specifically, it's how do they stack up against Ohio State? I think we can all kind of agree on that. But the conference as a whole.
Maybe Penn State and Michigan, depending on the year.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. But by and large, it's mostly how do you stack up against the SEC? What all goes into that? Well, the AP poll dropped yesterday. 10 of the 16 teams in the SEC are ranked in the preseason top 25, and 6 of them are ranked inside of the top 15. So there is still this belief that the SEC is the most dominant conference across college football. Argument could be made that some people believe them to still be the deepest conference in college football because of their rankings. Now, I'm also not naive to the fact that some teams may get a little bit of benefit of the doubt because they do play in the SEC.
Exactly.
A very real factor as well. But for the most part, when you look at this conference big picture, a lot of people compare those. Why? I mean, look, at the end of the day, Texas A&M and Louisville finished with. Did they both finish 8-5 last season, or did Louisville finish
No,
7-6?
Louisville was 9-4.
Okay, Louisville was
Yeah.
9-4. I think Texas A&M finished 8-5.
8-5.
But at the
yeah.
but at the end of Notre Dame's season, who did they say was the bigger win? It's Texas A&M at 8-5.
Exactly.
Because they went on the road in SEC country and pulled away a win. From a win-loss record, Georgia was the most, I guess you could make the argument, unimpressive team that Notre Dame beat in the playoffs because, you know, they came into their conference championship with 2 losses already, and then Notre Dame handed IU their second loss of the season, and then Penn State, they played them in the semifinals. But the SEC win over the Georgia win in the Sugar Bowl is still kind of considered their biggest They were able to beat Georgia. A lot of
That's
it is
their
about
statement
perception.
win. Right. It's not about Indiana. It's not about Penn State. It's, oh my gosh, they beat Georgia. Holy moly. Can you believe it? Right. 100%.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, Trev, when you like it or not, there's a reason for that, and it's not just SEC bias. I mean, there was a time not that long ago where the SEC was clearly the best league in college football most years. There's the occasional years that I thought this league might have been better, or maybe that league might have been better, but for the most part, it has been the best league in college football. And for all the reasons that I talked about earlier, it's a league that's going to always get that attention because it's a league where just obviously you've got the ESPN deal, and you know it's the bias that they're going to have because it helps them, it benefits them financially to promote the league that they pay the most money to. You know, you talk about we mentioned earlier, just a lot of the top talent in the country is from that region. And so that's going to impact things. You know, look, you want to go down and recruit Georgia, North Carolina, and all these states that you and I always talk about that they want to recruit now Texas and all of those type of things. It's like, okay, well, having success against the SEC makes that a lot easier. You don't think that it's a coincidence that Notre Dame went down south and had their best D-line haul ever, or not ever, like in a decade? The year, like right after they beat Georgia and Texas A&M in the college, you know, like by double digits both games. I mean, and what did Notre Dame's defense do in both games? Dominated. I mean, like they can look, dude, man, yeah, Georgia has great D linemen, but man, did you watch Notre Dame's D line against Georgia? Like, I promise you, that's been discussed with Notre Dame coaches and recruits in the South, and it's usually not the Notre Dame coaches bringing it up; it's the players or the coaches. Of the high school players that are bringing it up. That stuff matters, Trev. And Notre Dame, you know, has a history, honestly, of where it hasn't been able to make those kind of statements, and it's been true for over a decade. And you know, as you just one season of success doesn't all of a sudden change the narrative. What I like about this season is you get a second straight opportunity to change the narrative, which I think is important. But let's talk a little bit, Trev, about where this narrative came from. And to me, it really goes back to sort of the Charlie Weiss era, because Notre Dame didn't play a lot of SEC teams in the Ty Willingham era and the Bob Davie era. Like, they were playing Georgia Tech and Colorado and Oregon State in bowl games. They weren't playing a ton of SEC teams. Bob Davie, in fact, one year beat LSU in the regular season, then lost in the Independence Bowl in a rematch. Outside of that, you know, I mean, you got to go back to the Holtz era. They were playing A&M, but back then A&M was a Southwest Conference team. You know, Lou played Alabama. Last time Notre Dame played Alabama in the regular season was 1987 under Lou Holtz. So it's been a while, and you know, from the Lou Holtz era to the Brian Kelly era, where they just didn't have a lot of games against the SEC. A lot of the bowl matchups don't pit them against each other, but they did have that game at the end of 2006. And Notre Dame got absolutely dominated by LSU. That game carried a lot more weight, for example, than the fact that they blew Tennessee out in the regular season. Why? Because Tennessee wasn't that good. It was that bowl game that mattered. Then you fast forward, 5-6 years after that, and all of a sudden Notre Dame's got squared up against Alabama in the national title game, and Alabama just blows the doors off of Notre Dame. And then you play them again in 2020, blow the doors off of Notre Dame. And then they had 2 games against Georgia. And, yeah, Notre Dame was competitive, but your claim to fame against the SEC for 15 years was, well, we beat 2 5-loss LSU teams, and, hey, we beat Vanderbilt. And, oh, by the way, we almost beat Georgia twice. And when that's your sort of your talking point, you don't have success that you can brag about playing against the SEC. That's changed under Marcus Freeman, and it didn't actually start last year. But I think that when you look at the track record against those teams, Trev, that there is the number of bad losses is one good season does not change that unless you win the title, and they didn't do that. But I think that looking at the history, that's obviously something that you can't dismiss as a Notre Dame fan as to where this narrative came from. It didn't just come out because of ESPN bias. ESPN's bias came about because of the fact that you did go toe-to-toe against these teams, and you very rarely looked good at all.
No, that's a great point. And to your point, Brian, we started to see some things turn around when Marcus Freeman took over. We saw them beat South Carolina in the Gator Bowl in 2022. That was a win over a ranked SEC team. And then, you fast forward to this past season, you go down to College Station, you beat Texas A&M on the road in a hostile environment, and then you're able to knock off Georgia in the playoffs, the SEC champs. But you're going to have to be able to kind of be crowned the king of college football at the end of the season for that to keep carrying weight over. But you're still seeing the SEC bias week in, week out. I do want to ask you something before we kind of keep moving along in this conversation, because Texas gets a lot of benefit of the doubt this season. They have the best odds to win the national championship on FanDuel. They're the AP number 1 team in the country. They're the coaches poll number 1 team in the country all preseason. And then we've spent a lot of time this offseason talking about how it feels like every one of their position groups is just magically now the best in the country. Do you think that they would still be getting this much recognition if they were still in the Big 12? Like if they still had Arch Manning but they were still in the Big 12, are they just the consensus no-brainer number 1 team in the country, you think?
I do think that, because they made their first playoff appearance under Sark as a Big 12 team. Now, they were headed to the SEC, but they were a Big 12 team. If that deal never happened and they go to the playoff and play Washington and they make the college football playoff this year, odds are if they're in the Big 12, they're probably ranked higher than 5th. They wouldn't have had the bad loss to Georgia in there. They would have looked more dominant than they even did last season, and they would have still had a higher seed. And and I think that they went to the college football playoff last year and went to the semifinals and played Ohio State tougher than anybody else did. I mean, you can't deny those things. And if they did that as a Big 12 team, I do think they'd still be getting the same hype, because it's Texas and because the brand. Do I think that ESPN wouldn't be hyping them up as much as they are? Maybe not, because they don't have the Big 12. But the national media, they're and that's about the rabidness and size of the fan base and the need to generate clicks and what fan bases tend to do that for you. Well, Georgia Alabama, I'll eventually get to that team. Texas has got one of those fan bases that they're going to engage with if you talk about them, and whether they get mad at you for saying that they're not the greatest thing since sliced bread, or whether they're agreeing with you and liking what you're saying, they're going to engage with you. And I think that's one of those things that when I look at this football team and I look at the hype that they'd be getting, the fact that they do have Arch Manning, the fact that they do have Steve Sarkisian, who won a title at Alabama as the offensive coordinator, the fact that they are Texas and they are a big boy, I still think they'd be getting a lot of hype, because we saw that back in the day. We saw Texas they were always really highly ranked under Mac Brown, and they would then go out and still get whooped by Oklahoma and still get beaten some of the bigger games they played, but they still got all that hype. They still got all that preseason hype because it was Texas. And, like Mac Brown takes over for he goes 9-5 in 2000 in 1999, and they finished in the top 25. They lost their last 3 games of the year to Texas A&M, Nebraska, and Tennessee and Arkansas, and they still finished in the top 25. You look at 2000, after that 5-loss season, their preseason, the number 6 team in the country, despite going 9-5 the year. They go 9-3 that season in 2000 and get beat by Oregon in a bowl game, get blasted by Texas 63-14, get beat by Stanford in 2000. And that next year, they had, by the way, 1 ranked win that year. It was over Texas A&M. That next year, that team that finished outside the top 10 is once again preseason number 5 team in the country. And then that year, they were pretty good. They were 11-2 that year. In 2001, they come out in 2002, they're preseason number 3 team. Now, they had never climbed that high. Like they spent 1 week the year before ranked 3rd, and that was going into the Big 12 title game, and they got beat by Colorado. So they go out the next year, they're preseason number 3. They go 9-2. They finish the year ranked number 6. So they come out in 2003 as again number 5 team in the country. They get beat by Arkansas. They get blown out by Oklahoma again. They get beat by Washington State in the bowl game. They finish outside the top 10. And the next year, they're preseason number 7 team in the country. And that year they were pretty good. That was the 04 team where they went 11-1 and beat Michigan. So then they begin the next season, preseason number 2. And then, it was just kind of on and on and on. They lose Vince Young, lose a lot of talent. They go the next year in 06, after they win the title, they're preseason number 2. They get beat by Ohio State, get beat by K-State, get beat by Texas A&M. They finish the year ranked 13th. And in 2007, Texas comes out and they're preseason number 4 team in the country. Right? I mean, so this isn't new. I think the hype is more noticeable now because it's not just the polls that hype them up like it used to be. It's now every preseason magazine, all 953 of the college football shows on YouTube, every preseason magazine, all like 9,478 CFB analysts that are on YouTube and have a YouTube page, all are hyping up Texas because now the groupthink sets in and we're just more saturated with it. There's just more thrown at us about the hype about Texas, but it was always there. And Texas always got some of that SEC type of hype because they're Texas. That's why they got the Longhorn Network and nobody else did. So I think it would be similar. Maybe not quite the same because maybe ESPN doesn't hype them up as much because they wouldn't be partnered with ESPN. They'd be, with Fox and in the Big 12, but they would be getting a ton of hype. I mean, I just went through it. Every year they finish outside the top 10 and they get ranked in the top 5 in the next season. Notre Dame doesn't get that benefit out. Notre Dame finishes 2nd and then they're preseason number 6 the next year, right? A complete opposite type of situation. And so, yeah, I think that they would still be getting similar to that, but it gets put on steroids a little bit when they are in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree. We view that the same. It was just something I was thinking about, how much of them now being in the SEC kind of plays a factor. But Brian, we're talking about just Notre Dame in comparison to the SEC, what it means from a perception standpoint. But you touched on something earlier that I wanted to circle back on, and it's really, why does this matter? Why does Notre Dame's kind of relationship with the SEC, what weight does that carry? We talked a lot yesterday about Notre Dame's relationship with the ACC, and that one's a little bit more cut and dry, because they have the scheduling agreement and they play at least 5 games against each other every year, and then just scheduled Clemson to that 12-game or 12-year home and home series. The SEC, you kind of have to look a little bit deeper into it. Some of it's on the recruiting trail, some of it's perception, but big picture, why does it matter that Notre Dame has success against the SEC?
Well, the first reason's obvious because they're now on the schedule. And so you've now got SEC teams on the schedule. You had Georgia in 17, Vandy in 18, Georgia in 19. You were supposed to have Arkansas in 2020 before that season got canceled, or at least that schedule got kind of torn up and thrown out because of all the craziness in the world. And you've seen more of it. And then recently, obviously, you had Texas A&M on the schedule last year. This year, you have Texas A&M and Arkansas again. And so you have an opportunity now to go head-to-head against these teams in non-bowl game situations, which means you're going on their campuses. In the last 2 years, we have heard from media people at ESPN that Texas A&M is the hardest place to play. And then when you listen to them do Arkansas games after the Tennessee game, this is one of the hardest places to play. Now, miraculously, Kyle Field is apparently not that hard to play in, according to CFB 2026 video game. Well, it's because why? Because Notre Dame and Texas went in there and beat them last year. Doesn't change the environment. Just means those teams were better than Texas A&M, as I say all the time. Now it's, you got to go to Arkansas, and that's a loud stadium and all these people and all this other kind of stuff. And so you have opportunities to have success where you can say, look, man, we've won how many straight games against the SEC? This will be what, 5? Won't this be 5? Because they didn't play anybody. They lost the only SEC team they played in 2020. I don't believe Notre Dame played anyone in the SEC in 2021 under Brian Kelly, correct? Because they played Oklahoma State in a bowl game, Florida State, Wisconsin, Cincinnati Tech, USC, North Carolina, Georgia Tech. Yeah, no SEC teams in 2021. Then you come out in 2022, so you've lost your most recent game. And that season, Notre Dame goes out and beats South Carolina in a bowl game, a ranked South Carolina team. And then nobody in 23, and then in 24, you beat Texas A&M, you beat Georgia, and then now you get a chance to play Texas A&M, who will probably be ranked. So not only do you get a chance to extend your winning streak against the SEC to 5, 4 of those 5 teams were ranked when you played them. And I would imagine that Arkansas won't be ranked because they got to play at Memphis and at Ole Miss before they play Notre Dame. Now, if they win those games, then they're going to be ranked, and it's not out of the question for them to win those games, which we'll get into when we get into our SEC predictions. But 5 games in a row against the SEC, that's now like you have some bragging rights, and you can say, "Well, I haven't beat any of the good teams." Well, we beat A&M twice, and we beat your champ last year by double digits in the postseason. So I think it certainly gives them some brag. Oh, South Carolina fans, Notre Dame's okay. Well, we beat you last time we played you, so I mean, you can. Right now there's only one fan base in the SEC that has a right to talk trash to Notre Dame, and that's Alabama. Georgia can't anymore. LSU never could, and they thought they could. What about 06? I mean, we've played twice since then, so I mean, maybe you should shut your pie hole. I mean, what fan base right now can sit there and say, well, last time we played you, okay, yeah, Missouri, you might have beat Notre Dame last time you played in 1977 or something like that. I think Ole Miss, I actually think, beat Notre Dame the last time they played, I think, because that was 1977. I believe that is the last time they played. Nobody cares about that. And so it's more about, last 15, 20 years. And so being able to have that kind of dominance to where you can still have that sort of actually, I was wrong. They played in 1985 and Notre Dame beat them. So Ole Miss can't even say that anymore. But I think that's what it boils down to for me, Trev, is to have that sort of bragging rights, but also getting into the postseason and the playoff. You're now looking at it to where these 2 wins are going to be matched up and compared to other SEC teams when it comes to seeding. When you talk about, Notre Dame didn't play anybody. Well, A&M's a pretty good team, but then you look at it and you're like, okay, well, Texas A&M has to play Texas this year, and they have to play. I think Arkansas plays. Let me pull up the schedule here real quick. Arkansas plays. So Texas A&M has to play Florida. They have to play Texas and South Carolina, 3 teams who potentially are going to be playoff teams. And then you look at Arkansas. This year, they have to play Ole Miss, they have to play Tennessee, they have to play Texas A&M, they have to play LSU, and they have to play Texas. All 5 of those teams have a shot to some degree of being a playoff team. Well, if you're getting into seeding, now you can say, well, look, Notre Dame played this team and you played that team, and this is how Notre Dame performed against those teams, and this is how you performed against those teams. And you start to say, okay, that's something you can compare. And then you can start getting into some of the they didn't. Georgia and Notre Dame didn't play the same teams, but there's this, there's that, and you start getting some of that, like down the road stuff that I don't love as much. But it just gives you another gauge to say, look, we faced 2 SEC teams, one at home, one on the road, and you beat them both, and hopefully beat one of them convincingly. And I think that's a big part of it when it comes to jockeying for position in the postseason. I mean, if you replace Stanford last year or Miami of Ohio last year for, just pick a middle of the road SEC team.
Missouri.
Kentucky. Missouri. Like that's even beating a bad Kentucky. Like, let's say, so not even a middle of the road. Missouri's a good middle of the road team. Let's pick a bad SEC team. Okay, you beat Kentucky instead of Miami of Ohio. That's going to matter because you say, well, look, I mean, you're talking about this team should get in the playoffs. Kentucky beat them at their place, and we beat them by 40. Like that would matter more than beating a Miami of Ohio, than beating a Minnesota, who's a better Big Ten team, or beating a Georgia Tech in some instances. So I think that's a big reason why. Is I just think that having those wins, because of the hype and the narrative. Guys, you think the committee isn't influenced by the perception of the SEC? Of course they are. You don't think voters are influenced by the perception of the SEC? Of course they are. And so when you have a chance to say, hey, look, we went toe-to-toe against these teams and we stacked up, not only do we win the game, but we handled them physically. Our speed was right there with them. All those things matter. Whereas if you go play a Vanderbilt in 2018 and you barely beat them, and then they go have a losing record in the SEC, it doesn't look as good. Like when I use the Kentucky example, if you'd have beat Kentucky 24-21, that wouldn't be perceived well. Well, look, dude, they beat Ole Miss. They almost beat Georgia. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Those are SEC games. They're different. It's nonsense, but that's what they would say. Well, we beat them by 40. We beat them by 30. That stuff starts to matter. And so I think that's a big reason why it's important. It's because you don't have like the conference to rely on. You like if you're comparing a couple Big Ten teams to SEC teams from a seeding standpoint, well, the Big Ten's not as strong as the SEC. Oh, timeout. Hold on a second. Ohio State beat Texas. Michigan went on the road and beat Oklahoma. I mean, you have some of these matchups where your conference can boost you up. So you say, well, Indiana's not that good or Iowa's not that good. Well, hold on a second. They beat a team that went and beat an SEC team. You know what I mean? And where Notre Dame doesn't have that. And the only thing that they do have, if you're ever going to use it at all, is the ACC, who's been getting dominated by the SEC in recent years. You can't say, well, hey, we dominate the ACC, because then the SEC can be like, yeah, so do we. So who cares? But when you've got your own toe-to-toe against them, and at least one of them being a pretty good team, I think that certainly helps raise your profile on the field. And then, of course, Trevor, there's the off-the-field aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Perception is just such a huge part of this discussion. When I look at Notre Dame in comparison to the SEC, it's everything. It's recruiting. It's your perceived wins on the field. I'll draw back to what I said earlier. Now, let me clarify, because I saw there was also some confusion in the chat. I also don't think that Georgia was their most underwhelming win. Let me say that loud and clear. I think that it was because of the perception of the win, because of what it meant to beat the SEC champions. But at the end of the day, we're talking about Georgia's two-loss team, whose two losses were to two teams who didn't play in the conference championship and didn't make the playoffs. And in the final game of the regular season, went to 8 overtimes against a team that Notre Dame beat 31-13 in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, but why was it a big win? They beat the SEC champs. You hear it every single weekend, especially when Notre Dame plays a night game. They have SEC size. I was down on the field.
Speed.
Yes, I was down there on the field on pregame, and Notre Dame has SEC speed and SEC size and length. And so from a perception standpoint, it's huge. I'm not saying that it's right, that they're the only measuring tool for the rest of college football. I think Ohio State needs to be in that discussion. Penn State, maybe Oregon to a degree, Michigan, depending on the year, Clemson, depending on the year.
Florida State, depending on the year. Yeah.
Yes, but by and large, it is always the SEC. So perception is such a huge thing. But then, of course, like you said, Brian, the off-the-field things, recruiting. You always stack up to how you recruit against the SEC. A lot of just, again, same conversation with before. You also stack up to see how you recruit against Clemson and Ohio State and Oregon. But it's a big deal when Notre Dame can go down into the South and get players in Alabama and in Georgia and in Florida. And so off-the-field stuff is huge when we're talking about Notre Dame versus the SEC.
Yeah. Roger Dodger, our resident USC fan, said, I don't think USC lost a game to the SEC this century. Perhaps he's blocked out 2016 out of his mind. That would count as part of this century, correct? So I can understand why he's blocked that out of his head a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, yeah, I would imagine so. But no, I think the recruiting piece in all seriousness, Trevor, is incredibly important. It's incredibly important because the reality is in for the most part, when you want to get players from the South, you're going to have to be able to convince them that you need to leave close by. You need to leave your home. You need to leave your region. You need to leave the people that you're comfortable with and come up to Notre Dame. And your reasoning for that has to be something that's compelling. And it can't just be academics for all those kids. There will be some kids that matters a ton, and we've seen that for Notre Dame. But there's going to be some kids who are like, yeah, coach, that's compelling, but I also want to be an NFL draft pick. I also want to do this. I also want to win a championship. And then the reality is you didn't really have those. You didn't really have those metrics that you could look at and point to and say, hey, look, you need to come up here because not only are you going to get an education that just can't be matched in the SEC, with all due respect, even to Vanderbilt, but you're going to get a chance to be a high draft pick. You're going to get a chance to compete for a championship. You're going to get a chance to play the best teams in the country. Look, we got Alabama on the schedule. We got Texas on the schedule. We got, we've played Georgia. We play this, we play that. I think those things matter. And when you're talking about trying to convince young men to come play for you, when you're trying to convince families and parents to say, hey, this is why you should let your child come play for us, because we can provide him these opportunities. Well, what makes you say you can provide those opportunities, coach? Well, look what we've done. And that stuff matters, Trev. I mean, you can say it doesn't matter and, oh, you're a good salesman or whatever, but it does matter. It absolutely matters. And when you can say, we know we can beat those teams because we've played those teams. And when we've played those teams, we've done this, we've accomplished this, you're going to have a lot of success. And that's the opportunity that Notre Dame has. And it's about building on the success that you had in the postseason last year. You can't, like, remember in 2012 when they beat Notre Dame, when Notre Dame beat Oklahoma, it was like a huge win for Notre Dame. And then what happened the next year? Oklahoma comes into Notre Dame Stadium and smacks them in the mouth. You can't allow that kind of thing to happen, because then all of a sudden, all the momentum we're talking about, out the window. And then no one's going to care that you beat Arkansas, because but yeah, Arkansas finished 13th in the SEC or whatever, 8th in the SEC or 7th in the SEC. And then that stuff just won't matter as much. So I think that's huge for Notre Dame to continue. Hey guys, we won 5 in a row against the SEC. So I don't want to, and as I think about it, let's just say that, I mean, the three wins they've had, only one of them was by single digits, and that was South Carolina. So, I mean, you beat A&M by 10 last year. You beat Georgia by 13 last year. Hopefully you can continue that level of double-digit victory, because at the end of the day, it's just about winning. So I think the recruiting piece of this is very important as well. And arguably just as important, because the recruiting success then will start leading to more on-field success. I mean, so obviously the on-field part matters if you're being compared in the postseason directly to A&M. So they're coming down who should be seated higher, Notre Dame or Texas A&M. They're both 11-1. Well, Notre Dame, because they beat them in the head-to-head. And that's kind of how that would work. And so I think that to me is very important. It's immediate, but when you talk about long-lasting impact, it's what that type of success does for you on the recruiting trail as you're looking to put together another great class. So I think those are the big reasons why. And then also the perception starts to change even nationally and in SEC territory. You just, how Notre Dame is treated is going to be different. When we talk about treated by the media and treated by ESPN and things like that, where now all of a sudden Notre Dame gets there comes a point in time where they're going to care enough about their reputation that they know that they can't spin certain things. I think everybody for the most part in the media gets that, especially for the national people. Like, look, I can spin this to a certain degree, but I can't keep spinning this, because this team is just, they've done too well. Like you don't hear them talk about Ohio State not having SEC speed. You don't hear that. Why? Because Ohio State's had enough success against the SEC. And with all due respect, one win by Missouri over Ohio State isn't going to change that. It's Ohio State has earned that. And, if you want to have that respect, you've got to earn it on the field. not by beating ACC teams or Big 10 teams or Big 12 teams or independents or AAC teams, but by beating SEC teams and beating the best SEC teams and doing it consistently. That's going to be the key. And that's the opportunity that Notre Dame has on their 2025 schedule with those 2 games against A&M and Arkansas, which ironically are SEC teams. They've been in the SEC for a while, but they used to be they used to be Southwest Conference teams back in the day. Arkansas was the first team to bolt the Southwest Conference and go to the SEC. Did I think in 91, 92 is when they bolted. So, yeah.
Well, you're right. The national championship conversation around the SEC is still extremely prevalent. I mean, FanDuel has 4 of the top 10 national championship odds belong to SEC teams. Texas is the number 1, Georgia's the number 2, Alabama's the number 5, and LSU's the number 8. All of them have greater odds to win the national championship than I believe what Notre Dame does at plus 1,400. And Texas is number 1 at plus 550 on FanDuel. So there's a lot of things that still point in that direction. Perception is going to be huge. And one of the things that I like about Notre Dame's recent success about the SEC is now there's no, to your point, you have to start giving credit where credit's due. But now there's also not as many excuses if they want to try to spin Notre Dame beating SEC teams either. There's not a, well, we just weren't prepared for it, we didn't see it coming type of conversation. Haven't heard a whole lot of that. I honestly thought that I was going to hear a little bit more of it after they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl last year. But people aren't going to be surprised when they see Notre Dame coming anymore. They know what this team is. They beat the SEC champs last year. They beat Texas A&M down in Kyle Field last year. So it's going to be interesting to watch how they handle that new type of pressure, not being kind of the rising new kid on the block to the SEC. Now it's like, okay, this team is legit. This team is for real. And that's going to be fun to see.
You know, you still get some, the quarterback was out, but a lot of people that I see whose opinion I actually care about, they look at Notre Dame and they're like, yeah, it wasn't, the quarterback impacted the game, but they also watched Notre Dame whoop Georgia in the trenches, especially the Notre Dame defense. They watched Notre Dame rip off big plays in that game and make big plays in that game. So I think people that actually care about integrity, care about, being correct, they've been willing to say that was a big win. Yeah, the quarterback was out. Sure, that matters. But guys, we watched that game. Notre Dame was the better team that day. And that's it's always fun to be able to look back and say, yeah, they were the better team that day. Well, what if they had the quarterback? Yeah, what if Notre Dame had Riley Mills, and what if Notre Dame had Benjamin Morrison, and what if Notre Dame had Boubacar Traore, and we can do this game we could play. What if Jeremiah Love was 100% healthy?
What if they had
the fact
Jags?
is they won. They played and they won, and that's what matters. And when you do it enough, and you're consistent enough with it, then you get to the point where the spin stops because that's kind of what they do. You can't keep making excuses. That's just what they do. And last year we saw a little bit of that. Well, if you had to play Marcel Reed, I don't know if that game would have gone the same way for you at Texas A&M. Okay. All right, I watched Marcel Reed get beat by USC, so you can stop that now. But the real ones, I think, no, they don't say that. Fans are always going to spin things a certain way.
Sure.
It's just can you, and that's not the perception we're talking about. We're more talking about the people that high school recruits are going to listen to and voters are going to listen to. They're not getting into the fan debates. They're getting into more of like a wow, this is you listen to Kirby Smart talk about Notre Dame in that press conference. The level of respect he clearly had for what he saw on film was obvious, and vice versa. I mean, the press conference between Marcus Freeman and Kirby Smart went way different than the one between Marcus Freeman and James Franklin. Because Kirby Smart knew, hey, we got our hands full today. And James Franklin, I don't know what the heck he was thinking. But that's kind of where I'm at. So, yeah, it's a big year.
It is. It really is. Well, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show. Don't go anywhere, folks. We are getting ready to dive into our SEC preview. But before we get there, you guys know what to do. Be sure to smash that like button. And then, as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, let's talk about the SEC conference here specifically. We're getting into part 2 of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And before we dive into the conference predictions and the superlatives, let's talk about this conference big picture. There's been a lot of talk this offseason about, who's the deeper conference and who's the harder conference to play in between the SEC and the Big Ten. And that just might be an ongoing conversation for years to come. Years down the road. But when you do look at this conference, Brian, big picture up top, are they a deep conference? Do you think they're going to be a little bit more top heavy? How do you see this playing out for them?
Well, I'll start with this, Trevor. I think this is a big year for the SEC. I do. I think this is the year where if they don't perform better on the bigger stages, the little tiny chinks in the armor that we see now become much bigger dents, because you could say, well, look, we had a down year this past year, and young quarterbacks and quarterback whatever this and that, and Ohio State was really good and Notre Dame was really good, and our best team wasn't even that. It was a down year for them, and say, okay, well, what about 2023 when the SEC champ didn't get past the semifinals again? So not only has an SEC team not won the last 2 national championships, they haven't had an SEC team even play in the last 2 national championship games. You've had 2 Big Ten teams, a Pac-12 team, and an independent play in the last 2 national championships. And then you look at some of the bowl success or lack thereof that we saw in recent seasons. And you have to say, like, look, it's kind of like, you remember it was, I think, 07 or 08, and USC got beat by like Cal, and then they had a game where they got beat by Stanford. And I just kind of felt like at that point in time, Pac-12 teams, I think it was Cal in 06, actually, now that I think about it. Let me actually go look at USC's season, but I think it was 2006. And then there were other issues going on, but USC lost a game early that year, middle of the year. It was Oregon State, so I was wrong. And after that game, USC was still the best team in the Pac-12 the next few years, but teams didn't fear them the same way. And so they dropped games to Cal. Remember in 2007, they got beat by a really bad Stanford team that Notre Dame beat that year. Notre Dame stunk that year. They got beat by Oregon. They got beat at home by that USC team. 2008 USC, again, they're a really good football team. They went 12-1, finished number 3, lost to Oregon State again. But then even some of their wins weren't like blowouts, 17-10 over Arizona, 17-3 over Cal. And you just started to see where they were still better than everybody else, but teams didn't fear them the same way. And then in 09, Pete Carroll's last year at Notre Dame or at USC, they got beat by Washington. They got destroyed by Oregon. They got destroyed by Stanford. They got destroyed by Arizona. And you're just like, okay, now it's they've never been the same team since then, because teams didn't fear them anymore. And I think that's what's in front of the SEC this year is, do teams fear them? And if they continue to have these losses on the big stage, all of a sudden the other leagues are going to say, hey, we're not afraid of you. Because sometimes you've seen it in some of these bowl games in the past where the game is over before it even starts because the other team is so intimidated by the SEC size and the SEC speed. And they would have probably lost those games anyway, but there just was a level of intimidation. I mean, heck, Brian Kelly went into the semifinal game against Alabama with a strategy of let's not get blown out. I mean, think about that. I don't know that you're going to have that same fear of the SEC right now unless they can kind of alter course and start getting back to having some of that big success. And it starts in the regular season. If A&M can go into South Bend and beat Notre Dame, or if Arkansas can beat Notre Dame on their home field, or if Texas can go into Ohio Stadium and beat the Buckeyes, if LSU can go on the road and beat Clemson, if Michigan or if Oklahoma can beat Michigan, there's a lot of those type of crossover games where, like Auburn plays Baylor. There's all these games this year with a crossover. And then on top of that, you've got the rivalry games, Florida State, Georgia Tech and Georgia, Louisville and Kentucky, where, Georgia gets their groove back this year against Georgia Tech after kind of not playing great against them the last 2 years? Or does Georgia Tech say, hey, we're not afraid of you anymore, and so we're gonna take it to you? I think this year's big in the regular season, and then when you get into the postseason, Trevor, it's okay. How are they going to handle some of these teams that have been giving them some problems in recent years? Can Texas finally get over the hump? Can Georgia get back to dominating in the postseason? Can Alabama get back to dominating in the post-Saban era? Can Brian Kelly do at LSU what fans think he can do at LSU, but hasn't shown that he can do yet? Does A&M take that jump under Mike Elko? There's all these questions about the SEC that if you don't kind of get some of your mojo back this season, then I think the narrative could quickly change. Because you know how it is, Trev. When it turns hard. It turns real hard. And if they don't have a lot of success, they're not going to lose all the games, and they don't have to win all the games. It's not like if A&M beats Notre Dame, Texas beats Ohio State, Oklahoma beats Michigan, and Clemson LSU beats Clemson, that we're going to be like, yeah, but Auburn got beat by Baylor. No, if you win most of them, it's like you're going to get that bump. But you've got to win most of them, especially when they're the two top 10 matchups or ranked matchups, and they need to get some of that mojo back because people just aren't afraid of calling them out publicly anymore. I mean, look at the Big Ten. We don't need to listen to you anymore. We're going to do our own thing. We're the two-time champs. So like Tony Petitti's basically saying to Greg Sankey, you're not the most powerful commissioner in football anymore. I am. And so we know that you guys don't care about the automatic qualifiers. We do. Yeah. And if you don't change how you schedule, then we aren't going to go with this. I don't think they had the guts to do that 4 or 5 years ago. They do now.
No, Brian, that's such a good point. We started to see it last year. Even argument could be in 23, but last year teams just didn't flinch when they played SEC teams. I mean, Miami went into the swamp, and we know what Florida was, and we weren't expecting them to be, like any sort of vintage Florida team. But Miami beat the brakes out of Florida in the swamp.
Yeah.
5-10 years ago, that carries a lot of weight. It's like, that's Florida in the swamp. We saw Notre Dame and Ohio State in the postseason not flinch against the SEC champs and the SEC runner-ups. We watched Georgia Tech, 7-4 team go down into go down into 7-4 at the time. 7-4 team go into Athens and not flinch. And we're really kind of working Georgia for the first really 3 quarters of that game until they blew the lead. And then, of course, you have, kind of their team at the top. When you hear SEC football, you think of Nick Saban and you think of Alabama. And right off the bat, it's like, hey, this isn't Nick Saban's Alabama anymore, man. And then what happens? First year that Kalen DeBoer takes over, not that it's his fault. He's just a first-year coach at Alabama. They missed the playoffs and they're not playing for the SEC championship game. So there were a lot of ingredients at play there, and I couldn't agree more. This is a huge year for them. Huge. Yeah. It's weird to think that this is a big year for perception for the SEC because we just got done talking about what the perception is for other teams.
That perception still is true right now.
Mm-hmm.
The perception that the SEC is the top dog is still mostly true right now. You can say, oh, yeah, I know that the last 2 years the Big Ten has won it. Right, but from 16 to 18, Clemson won it twice and beat Bama both times to win it. But the perception was, and Insured by Big brought this up in the board, the perception was still that the SEC is the big dog, but part of that was they were still getting to the title game, and they were still dominating most of the matchups against the other Power 5 conferences. My point is that's not happening right now to the degree that it has. Georgia, you look, big win over Clemson. Yeah, but they almost lost to Georgia Tech, and they got smacked by Notre Dame. So what carries more weight? And so that's my point is they need to be able to kind of get some of that mojo back by saying, okay, even if we don't win the title, we still dominate for the most part. It's just the one best team in the country isn't from the SEC, but we're still the big dogs. Go 500 against Power 5 teams, and they've had a couple of years. They have had some years where they weren't that good. 2023, their non-conference success wasn't that great. LSU's lost 3 straight home openers or 3 straight season openers to non-conference teams, 2 ACC teams and a Big Ten team. And so I think that stuff starts to matter. and they're going to have plenty of opportunities this year to get that done. But they're going to have to do it. And then I'll say this, Trev, let's talk a little just briefly about the SEC specifically. I want to get your thoughts on this. I think it's an interesting year for the SEC because I don't know that there's a dominant team in the SEC. I think there's 3 teams that have a shot to be, but I look at the SEC and I see a lot of similarity, a lot of question marks, a lot of, well, they could be good, but with a lot of teams in the SEC, including at least one of the teams that everybody's hyping up, Texas. That's a team that could be really good, but for me. And how does that shake out? Like, I don't know that it's good that 3 teams from the league just dominate everyone else in the league. I almost wonder if it's better that there's a lot of upsets or during the season, as long as they win a lot in the offseason. But that's another thing too, is I do think that last year the Big Ten was better than the SEC. I do believe that. And not just by what happened in the postseason, but also what happened in the regular season. Even some of the wins that the SEC had, they weren't overly impressive wins. Georgia Tech, almost beating Georgia. Miami stomping Florida and things like that. So it was not necessarily a great year in their matchups. Bowl losses, that the SEC only cares about bowl losses when they win. But, Michigan beating Alabama was a bit of a black eye for the league. I think this year, however, when I look at rosters and I look at the quality of teams, I do think the SEC has a shot to be the best league in college football, because I actually think the arguments that they're making this year that at times are not true because, we're so deep. Yeah, no, you're not. You're not really. This year, I think it is true. I think this is a very deep league this year, like to where we've got teams from like 10 to 13. And I'm like, I think that's a middle of the road, maybe even top half team in a lot of other leagues of college football this year. I do think that. That's why I think the non-conference stuff is so important. Auburn, who I expect to finish somewhere, middle to bottom of the conference, beating a Baylor team that has a shot to be one of the best teams in the Big 12. Like if Mississippi State, who we expect to be a bottom, team in the league, what if they can upset an Arizona State? Like some of those games too that we all think Texas, Ohio State, but it's those other games where it's not one of the big dogs that can start kind of gaining some respect for your league too, and show how deep you are.
Yeah, to answer your question, I do think that this is going to be a good year for the SEC, and I do think it's a year where they kind of reclaim the top conference in college football. I don't think it's a top-heavy conference. I am in line with you that I think the top 3 teams are kind of they're ahead of the remaining other 13 teams in the conference, but the gap between the top 3 teams and say teams 4, 5, and 6 is not as big of a gap as it was last year. Last year you kind of look at, okay, you got Texas, Georgia up at the top. And then after that, you kind of have basically Alabama, LSU, South Carolina clearly fighting for positions in the tier 2 spot. This year, I think it's going to be a little bit more evenly dispersed as far as competitiveness in the conference. I mean, to your point, I went out and I did basically overall records for these teams. And there's going to be lower middle of the road teams in this conference that will absolutely be bowl eligible. They're just going to be like the 10th ranked team in the conference. And so I think this is going to be a deep conference this year. I think that the SEC is going to have a bounce back year compared to what they did last year. But with that being said, I also don't think that they are going to have that one purely dominant team that just kind of takes over the league as a whole. And so I think that's a little bit interesting when you talk about the SEC, but I do think it is a very deep, deep conference.
I do. I don't think it was last year. I think it was very top. I think it was like 5, 6 good teams to the top, and then the bottom of the league last year was bad. It was really bad. And I think part of it was quarterback play in the league was really down last year. And if I was doing like a trending in an arrow for the SEC, I would have it trending back up, not trending compared to the Big 12, but just for itself, for its own standard, it's trending down for what the standard of the league has been, like based on last year. But if I'm projecting forward, it's actually trending up for me, because what's happened in the SEC and we'll talk about this a little bit and when we break it down, is I think quarterback play has a chance to be better with some of the emerging young quarterbacks in the league. And not just the Arch Mannings and the DJ Lagways, but, Michael Van Buren transferring to LSU now has me feeling like, okay, LSU is going to be okay post Garrett Nussmeier. If Garrett Nussmeier goes down, and he's been a little banged up in camp, there's a really talented kid there that I think is ready to take over. You look at Oklahoma getting John Mateer, and then, but then it's like, okay, what about after that? So, I mean, it's not true for everybody, but I look at Arkansas with Taylon Green. I look at Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia. These are some of the veteran guys to go with the younger players. Ty Simpson coming up, but then Alabama got Keelan Russell this last offseason, who's a big-time quarterback as a true freshman. And you start to say, Auburn goes out and gets Deuce Knight. Now, who knows, what Jackson Arnold's going to do, or if Deuce ever gets his time this year, but that's a really talented young quarterback that you say, okay, the future's bright. And so I think those things all factor into the health of the league. Is the quarterback play good? And I just think the future at quarterback is a little better than it's been the last couple of years, where I don't think quarterback play in the league has been all that good. That's another reason why I think the league is going to be trending up a little bit. I just think overall the SEC just the offensive football has not been good in the SEC the last couple of years. And I think a lot of that has to do with the talent at quarterback in the league, which that trends up, then all of a sudden quarterback play starts getting better. And that's how I see it.
Well, what do you think, Brian? Do you want to dive into some superlatives for this conference?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, somebody said in the chat, Salty said, I suspect that the transfer portal has lowered the SEC ceiling and it won't turn around anytime soon. Guys want to start more than stay in the SEC. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that you can point to the SEC suffering from the portal the last 2 years. I think it's impossible to deny that NIL and the portal was a big right hook to the SEC. Big right hook. And it has hurt the league. You don't see Georgia and Bama just reloading like they could in the past, where they've got 5 stars stacked in throughout their depth chart. That's true. I don't think that's a permanent thing, however, or it doesn't have to be a permanent thing, however. I think good coaches adapt. And the question is going to be, how do they adapt? And I think some of the teams in the league are adapting fine, others not as fine. So I don't think it's necessarily a permanent thing. But this year, if it's a third down year in a row, then all of a sudden that conversation was like, maybe this is the new normal now that everybody else can pay players and not just the top level SEC teams.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It definitely evened the playing field more than it did. It evened the playing field more than it did like really kind of disparage the league. But I mean, you've seen the old pictures of like Alabama running back rooms where in one picture they had like TJ Yeldon and Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. And, they just can't do that anymore. Just because of, to Salty's point, there's players that want to go and get more meaningful playing time. But it's not a complete coincidence that now that NIL and the transfer portal are kind of a very hot topic of conversation in college football, that the SEC is not far and away the most dominant conference in college football either. So I think both can be true for sure. For sure. Well, Brian, what do you think? SEC superlative time?
Yeah. I'm ready to kick it off, Trev. So we're going to do offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, rookie of the year, and coach of the year. And we'll wrap that up, and then we'll move on to our predictions, 16-1 predictions. But yeah, let's start off some superlatives, Trev. We'll start off offensive player of the year. You can frame it however you want. It can be MVP. It can be most outstanding. For me, it's most outstanding combined with a little bit of value, but it's really just about best for me, not most important. So let's kick things off with your take on this.
Yeah, my offensive player of the year in the SEC is Lenora Sellers, the quarterback for South Carolina. We saw what kind of electric playmaker he was last season. I think South Carolina is due for a slightly better season than what they had last year. Look, we're talking about a program that finished the season with 6 straight regular season wins. Once he started to develop as a passer, that's when South Carolina started to take off. I think he continues to trend up. I think that voters especially will kind of hold a dual threat quarterback a little bit in higher regard he's an exciting playmaker. That was a little bit of what I talked about yesterday with CJ Bailey at NC State winning the ACC Offensive Player of the Year. So I think Lenora Sellers is going to follow suit. I had a couple of other players in contention for it, but at the end of the day, I think Lenora Sellers takes it home.
I could see that, Trev. I think he's a very talented player. Here's my hold up with Lenore Sellers. I have some question marks about the offensive line, but the biggest thing for me when I think of Lenore Sellers is, can he stay healthy? That's going to be the big key for me. With his style of play, it tends to lead to maybe taking some shots that he otherwise shouldn't take. And then I look at last year, and he wasn't healthy last season. That doesn't mean he's doomed to always be that way, but it still is sort of like, okay, that's true, but you need to show me that you can be that type of player that can be healthy for a whole season. Because he only missed the one game against Akron, but he wasn't quite the same guy for the next few games against, Ole Miss, and especially he was okay against Bama, wasn't great against Oklahoma, turned it back up against Texas A&M and finished the year pretty well after that. But he's got to show me he can stay healthy for a whole season. He is going to his junior season now, which I think gives him just another season of getting bigger and stronger, the physical maturity. But that was my big holdup. And then here's the other reason I went with my guy, and that's Ryan Williams. Is I just think Ryan Williams is poised for a monster season at Alabama. I think he is probably the most talented offensive player in the league. I think a lot of people that want to nitpick his freshman season seem to forget that was supposed to be his senior year of high school. He reclassified and skipped his senior season to start at Bama. It's going to be year 2 in the system. He's going to be a year older and stronger. And the fact that they're going to have a quarterback that can actually complete passes this year is going to be huge for him. And so I also think the pickup of Isaiah Horton, the return of Jeremy Bernard, is going to be big for him because you have weapons that can take some of that pressure off of him. But I think Ryan Williams is poised for an absolute monster season in the SEC, and he is my pick to be the player of the year. And it's a bit of a bold take not to go with the quarterback. You've got obviously Lenore Sellers. You've got Arch Manning gets a lot of preseason love. You've got Garrett Nussmeier gets a lot of preseason love. There's a lot of quarterbacks that are in contention for this, but I just think Ryan Williams is the best player in the SEC, and I think that's going to be shown. Or I think he will be the best player in the SEC this season in his second season, and I'm expecting big things from him. Big things from him. How about defense, Trev?
Defense, I have a Texas edge rusher, Colin Simmons. Last season he put together a fantastic freshman year. He had 14 tackles for a loss. He ended the season as the team leader in sacks with 9 sacks. He's going to be a big focal point of the Texas defense this upcoming season. And one of the reasons why I think their defense is held in such high regard across the country, some stuff I think gets inflated. I don't think Colin Simmons falls in that category. He's a very productive player. He is an elite talent. I have Colin Simmons winning the Defensive Player of the Year. I think he is one of the better defensive players in that league as well. And so that for me is what takes it home for me. So I have Colin Simmons winning the Defensive Player of the Year in the SEC.
I'm with you on the position. I'm with you on the youth, the age, but I'm going with Dylan Stewart from South Carolina. I think these are the two. I think to your point though, these are the two best players in the SEC on defense. Is Dylan Stewart and Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons had the better freshman year. I think part of the reason was I think the system helped him. I think he's incredibly talented, but I also think he was their best pass rusher. Where last year with Dylan Stewart, who had a really good freshman season, also 10.5 tackles for loss on the season, also had a 6.5 sacks in the season, but he was contending with Kyle Kennard, who had 10.5 sacks or 15.5 tackles for loss and 11.5 sacks. You look at Dylan Stewart or Colin Simmons last year, Baron Sorrell, maybe. I think he benefited more from Colin Simmons than the other way around. This year, I think with Brian Thomas on the other side, I think that South Carolina is going to have a really good pass rushing duo. But when I look at Dylan Stewart, I'd see his game taking a big leap and just putting up monster numbers. And I also think that you're going to fall victim a little bit with Colin Simmons. Some of he was so good as a freshman that people start to maybe nitpick a little part of his game. Could be a factor too. But I just think overall his unit doesn't have as much to protect him as I think what South Carolina has, with just some of the uncertainty in the front seven outside of him and Anthony Hill. So that's part of it too. But look, this is a no wrong answer duo here, in my opinion. I think they're both going to be outstanding. This next one's a little tougher for me, Trev. Let's go offensive, or let's go rookie of the year. Rookie can be a freshman or a redshirt freshman. It's not a transfer portal guy. So who was your rookie of the year in the SEC?
Yeah, rookie of the year in the SEC for me is DJ Pickett. He's a cornerback at LSU. He was one of the highest rated players in the 2025 class. I think he was LSU's top rated recruit for that class, but by some outlets, he was considered the number one cornerback in the country. He's 6'5", officially listed on their roster, which is gigantic for a cornerback. But LSU's defense is going to need a turnaround this year if they want to have the type of season that Brian Kelly hopes that they can have, and I'm sure, and sure by Big hopes that they have, and a lot of the other LSU fan base members. And so I do think that their secondary is going to have to take a step up this year, along with the rest of the defense. It's year 2 under Blake Baker. And I think LSU has kind of been at their best defensively when they've had a marquee corner. I'll go back and think of a marquee defensive back. I think of the years that they had Tyrann Mathieu and Patrick Peterson, and in the 2019 season, the 2020 season, they had Derek Stingley Jr. I think that I don't know if he's going to be quite at that level immediately as a true freshman, but I think DJ Pickett has the opportunity to be that good. And so I have him as my rookie of the year for the SEC.
That's a good pick, Trev. I like that one a lot. I was back and forth on this. There's a couple defensive players that I liked, a couple offensive players that I liked. There's a lot of receivers in the SEC that I could see doing really well. Khalil Lockett from Texas is an option, but Talon Taylor, I've read some things that he's doing he's doing really well. CJ Wiley for Georgia are potential options, but I'm actually going with a little bit of a wild card here, and I'm going to go Malik Clark from South Carolina. I think he's a chance. He's a bigger kid. He's got a chance to be a big play weapon. I think he's going to, and I've heard he's battling for playing time. I think he's going to have a point this season where he kind of becomes a big play weapon for Lenore Sellers and just gives them a bit of that big-bodied outside downfield type of weapon for the Gamecocks. So he was my pick. There was a couple other receivers I considered, a couple running backs. Ole Miss has got a freshman running back that's really good. He's battling for time. If I was more confident he was going to be number 2, I would maybe go with him. But I'm going to go with Malik Clark. Let's do coaches.
Coach of the year for me in the SEC is Kalen DeBoer from Alabama. He's somebody that caught a lot of flack in year 1. And look, any coach taking over for Nick Saban was going to catch a lot of flack because it's an impossible standard to live up to. How are you going to follow the best college football coach of our generation? That's a tall order. But I think Alabama's due for a bounce back season. I really do. I think they have the pieces for it. He gets his offensive coordinator back from Washington, finally has a quarterback that fits his system. And I think that he is going to kind of restore a lot of the faith in the fan base in himself by the coaching performance he's going to put on this season. I'm not going to get too much into it now. I'm saving that for the SEC prediction part of this show. But I have Kalen DeBoer winning the SEC Coach of the Year, Brian.
I'm with you. This is one we're on the same page. So I for all the reasons you talk about, I don't want to get too much into it because I'm going to give a little bit of away from what we're going to have in the predictions. But no, I think so. There's a couple other guys I thought about. I thought Mike Elko is a potential one. I think if A&M can have a big year, I think if Lenore Sellers wins the Player of the Year in the SEC, it means South Carolina is at least a 9-win team, which means Shane Beamer could maybe get some consideration for this one. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Kalen DeBoer having success, but then also a bit of a bounce back for me. So I'm with you on Kalen DeBoer.
Listen, folks, that's going to do it for part 2 of today's show. But do not go anywhere. We're getting ready to dive into our SEC predictions. But before we get there, make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know whenever this channel goes live. As always, please be sure to smash the like button. And please, please, please subscribe to the premium message boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. We are now 19 days away from Notre Dame kicking off their regular season, so there's going to be a lot of intel on the boards. There's going to be some changes that we are going to do to our in-season content schedule. That'll also be explained and ironed out on the message boards as well inside the Champions Lounge. You find all that, premium message boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in the final segment of today's show, we are going to be previewing the SEC Part 3 of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Brian, this is going to be an interesting conference to break down. And I know you and I were talking back and forth before the show about some of the challenges that we came into. And some of that is because this conference is a little bit wide open, especially up at the top for who's going to take home the conference championship at the end of the season. I know FanDuel has certain odds and how they think that the season is going to end up for them. But overall, this was a tough conference to break down, man.
It does. I mean, you look at like you said, the FanDuel odds. Obviously, Texas is the preseason top team in the SEC. Almost everybody thinks it. I still don't understand how that's the case when you watch Georgia just beat them twice, including with their backup quarterback. But I get it. Alabama, Georgia coming in slight. I mean, it's close. It's plus 290 to plus 300. It's very close. Alabama third, LSU fourth. That's all to be expected. A&M fifth and sixth. That's where it gets a little bit like, okay, no South Carolina on there. Like, okay, that's interesting. No Ole Miss on there. Okay, that's interesting. So it just shows that the depth of this league. That when you look at those betting odds, obviously you see they have 3-4 teams that are good, that get a lot of good love when it comes to winning a championship, national championship, not just the conference championship, but the national championship. I think it's Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU are the 4 teams that are in the top 10 as far as best odds to win a championship. Correct? I believe is all 4 of those teams are in there. So I think this shows the competitiveness of this league. There is no Alabama that's just head and shoulders above everybody else. Or back when it was kind of like Alabama, LSU, and Georgia were just kind of better than everybody else. I think there's a lot of depth in this league. Part of it is the top isn't as strong as it used to be. But I think also what's happened with the portal is everybody keeps talking about how the portal has hurt the SEC. And I say, well, kind of. It's hurt the top teams in the SEC. I think it's helped the bottom teams in the SEC. Because now they can start getting some of these players that are, it's like Georgia had the Dumas Johnson kid that left Georgia. He went to Kentucky. And so I think that's helping the league as well look, the transfer portal helped Missouri get one of the best young pass rushers in the country, and Damon Wilson from Ohio State, or from Georgia. So yeah, it hurt Georgia, but he went to another SEC team. So I think overall it's helped create some parity in the league, not just in college football. And it's like there's this perception that all these portal guys are leaving the SEC and going to other leagues. Well, you don't think Texas A&M is a better football team because of the transfer portal? There's kids coming into the transfer to the SEC as well. Isaiah Horton going to Alabama, the receiver from Miami, right? That helps them a ton. Georgia goes to the Big Ten and gets Zechariah Branch. They get another SEC lineman. Noah Thomas leaves Texas A&M. He goes to another SEC team and going to Georgia. So we talked a lot about the need for, when we did our Texas A&M preview of Des Ricks and Julian Humphrey, 2 stud corners that have transferred in that need to be good. Well, where'd they transfer in from? Alabama and Georgia. So I think it's dispersed some of the talent in the league, not just 2 other teams. And then there's players leaving the other leagues and coming to play in the SEC. And Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt's not as good as they were last year, if not for the transfer portal. Getting Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers are 2 huge pickups for Vanderbilt last year that helped them have the success that they had. So I think those things all factor into it, and plays a role into why Notre Dame is, why these teams, why there's so much parity, I should say, in the SEC this year. But it's also, I think sometimes it's not just the top team coming down. I think it's also elevation from some of the other teams in the league.
Oh, yeah. Look at this graphic compared to what FanDuel had some of the ACC odds at yesterday. Very rarely do you see a gap of plus 10 odds between who may win the conference and who may be in second place. For example, yesterday when we talked about the ACC, Clemson is plus 110 odds and favorite to win the ACC. Next closest team is Miami at plus 370. The next closest team after that is Louisville at plus 750. We're talking about, you don't get above 600 until you get into the 5th deep team in the SEC. I think that speaks to the depth of the league, to your point, Brian. So I think that's really, really interesting to see where FanDuel has some of these odd lines.
I agree. So that's what FanDuel has. Now, Trevor, you and I get to tell a little bit of of what we have. So we'll do the same thing we did yesterday. We'll start. I'll give a group of teams, and then you'll give your group of teams. Today we're going to go 5-5-4-2, since there's 16 teams, not 17 teams, like the ACC. And we'll start off. I'll give my 12 to 16, 16 to 12. My team in the worst team in the SEC this year is going to be Kentucky. I think it's certainly possible, Trevor, when you look at their schedule and you look at kind of what they lost and just some of the issues and what they're counting on. I think it's certainly possible that Kentucky could maybe not win a game in the SEC this year. And that's saying a lot, but here's their SEC slate. Ole Miss at home, at South Carolina, at Georgia, home against Texas, home against Tennessee, at Auburn, home against Florida, at Vanderbilt. That's a brutal SEC schedule for anybody, much less a team coming off a 4-8 season. Now, this is also the same team that went out and beat Ole Miss on the road last year, and almost beat Georgia. So there's always a puncher's chance, but I look at this depth chart, I look at this roster, and there's some issues. I don't have a lot of faith in Zach Calzada at quarterback. I think Kentucky's going to have a really rough year this year. My next team in the SEC is Vanderbilt. Last year was a great story, Trev, and loved what we saw, and it was fun, and loved Clark Lee and all that. But I just look at Vanderbilt this year, and I don't know that they can repeat that magic for a host of reasons. I think their schedule this year is much tougher than it was last year. And they've got some of the teams that they were able to have some success against last year. They're going to have a tougher time with this year. And you look at their results last year. They lost to Missouri. They lost to Texas. They lost to South Carolina. Lost to LSU. Lost to Tennessee. Their in-conference wins were over Auburn, who wasn't very good last year. Kentucky, who wasn't very good last year. They had to play Kentucky at Kentucky. They get them at home this year. And then they beat Alabama in let's be honest, a bit of a fluky game. They were still a 3-win team in their league last year. Like, this isn't a team that was dominant in their league. They went 3-5 in their league last year, which gets them kind of near the bottom. And I think that they're going to be kind of close to that this year. And then you look at their 25 schedule, a little bit tougher. They play at South Carolina, at Alabama, home against LSU, home against Missouri, at Texas. That's their first 5 conference games. Then they're home against Auburn, home against Kentucky, and at Tennessee. That's a much tougher schedule this year than it was last year, which was challenging, but it's just a tougher schedule. And so I think people they know this team now. They know Diego Pavia. And I think when you look at how Vanderbilt struggled down the stretch last year, they started off well. They started the season off 5-2, 6-3, and then lost their last 3 games. I think that's more indicative of who this team is going to be than what they were last year. They will battle. That's the one thing I know about this team. They will battle, but I just don't know that they're going to win a lot of those games. Next for me is Mississippi State Bulldogs. Trev, I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of like some of the things that Jeff Lebby's doing with this football team at Mississippi State. I think their schedule is not the easiest schedule, and I think that's going to be something that's going to keep them from making as big of a jump as I think they're maybe capable of doing. But I like some of the things that they've done. I like some of the guys they've picked up from the transfer portal. I think that Jeff Lebby laid a solid foundation last year, and what he's trying to build. I think this is a team that has got a chance to be a little bit better this year. I'm not saying they're going to compete to get in the top of the league. I just think they're going to be a little bit better this year. Quarterback's going to be a big question. They got Blake Shapen from Baylor last year. He's projected to be started. They got Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State, who I think is a very talented player. So they got Fluff Bothwell in at running back, who's a talented player, who came in from South Alabama. I believe he was a 1,000-yard rusher last year at South Alabama. He's a talented runner. He could potentially be one of the better running backs in the league coming in this season. So I think he's got actually he was under 1,000, but he was 834 yards on only 112 carries last year, 7.4 per carry, 13 touchdowns last year. As a true freshman at South Alabama. He's a talented player. They had some portal losses. Obviously, they're going to have to overcome, but I don't know what it is, Trev. I just look at this team and some of the pickups they made and just how they competed last year, and I think Mississippi State's got a shot to be maybe a tad better, but they're another team that's got an absolutely brutal schedule this season. And then non-conference, they got to play Arizona State. But so they're going to be better. I don't know that the record will reflect it a ton. Number 13 on my list is the Missouri Tigers. Look, I know that Missouri is getting a lot of love. I just don't see it with this team, Trev. And part of it comes down to I am not a big Bo Pribula fan, and I'm not sold on him being that guy. I think their offensive line could be pretty good if Johnny Williams can make a quick transition to left tackle. I do worry a little bit about their tackles, who are both transfer guys. But I look at this team last year, and I see a team that struggled offensively last year with Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, and you wonder what they're going to do this year without those guys. And I think there's some issues. I think they have some good talent, but they don't have the talent they had a couple years ago, in my opinion. And then you look at their schedule, and one of the things that benefited Missouri last year is I think that they had a favorable schedule. I think their schedule's still a little bit more favorable than it's like, why does Missouri get kind of that break? But it's still a little tougher slate this year because of some of the road games they have. They get South Carolina at home and Alabama at home, Texas A&M at home. You almost kind of would rather those games be on the road because I think all those teams are capable of beating Missouri at Missouri. Then they've also got at Auburn, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma, at Arkansas. The only game that I look at and say that's a chalked up win is their home game against Mississippi State. So part of it is just I think their schedule is going to be is a little bit more challenging this season than maybe it has in recent years. And then number 12 for me is the Arkansas Razorbacks. This is a team that I have a hard time evaluating because there's some aspects of it I like. I think their offensive line and defensive line have a chance to be pretty good. Taylor Green was very productive last year, but they lost a big chunk of their receiving core. Their secondary is a major question mark. And then you look at the schedule, Trevor, and they didn't do any favors for Arkansas this season schedule-wise. They have to play at Ole Miss. That not even a little. They have to play at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Texas. Their home games in conference are A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Missouri. And oh, by the way, they also in their non-conference play at Memphis and home against Notre Dame. So give Arkansas credit. They didn't duck anybody in the like. They're not an SEC team you can point to and say, well, they don't play anybody. They play a really good G5 team in Memphis, and then obviously play the defending national runners-up. So I don't think that they knew that Notre Dame was going to be that when they scheduled them back in the 2000 teens, but that's still a very tough schedule for Arkansas. So I would not have Arkansas and Missouri this low if we were doing a power ranking of just the quality of the teams. They'd both be near the top 10 for me, but when you factor in the schedule, that's why I have those two teams as low as I do.
When I started diving into my list, it was interesting to see how much I wanted to factor in the chaos from the league last year, because there's so many teams that are kind of in the bottom of my list that just for whatever reason snuck away with a big win last year, outside of the final team that I have ranked, the lowest team that I have ranked in mine, which is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I do like their head coach. I do. Yeah, I like what Jeff Lebby's doing. He's going into year 2. But last season, Mississippi State went 0-8 in conference, and not a single loss was by single digits. I mean, you go through and you look at what they lost in the portal. They had 38 outgoing transfers. They had 34 incoming transfers. And, basically a complete roster overhaul is going to be interesting to see how Jeff Lebby handles that in his second year at the helm. I do agree, Brian, that I like some of the pieces of talent that they brought in, but I think they may be a year away from kind of like reaping some of the benefits of those. But would it surprise me if they didn't end up as the 16th ranked team? No, because I think it would be hard. It would be really disheartening to watch Jeff Lebby in back-to-back seasons finish in the SEC basically combined 0-16. But right now, I don't love their in-conference schedule. I mean, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Texas, at Arkansas, Georgia, at Missouri. Home against Ole Miss is also not that great. And when one of your out-of-conference championship games is against the Big 12 champions from last year that does return a host of talent, Mississippi State's going to have it rough. You mentioned that Van Buren, he took over as a starter last season. He has since transferred out. I hope that Blake Shapen can stay healthy, because that's the reason why Van Buren took over last season. It was I think it was like a similar injury to what like Riley Leonard had, just like more severe. It was season ending. It required surgery. So hopefully he can stay healthy. I like some of the pieces, but as of right now, I look at their schedule combined with how much roster turnover they had. I have them as my number 16 team in the SEC. My number 15 team, the Kentucky Wildcats. They're another team. They suffered a lot from the transfer portal. They had 31 outgoing transfers. They were 1-7 last season in conference. But they're a team that historically, the reason why I don't have them dead last is just consistent with what they've done in previous seasons. They just get that one win that it's like, not really sure how Kentucky won that game. 2024, they beat Ole Miss. In 2023, they beat a ranked Florida team at the time. In 2022, I think they beat Florida again in the start of the season on the road in the Swamp, and Florida was ranked number 12 in the country. And so I think that they have another one of those wins in them, and I think it's just for the simple fact that the team may get overlooked. I think some of the drama with their head coach and Mark Stoops is still lingering with some of the few remaining players that they do have on that roster because I know he really was trying to gun for the Alabama job and then didn't get it. And so there's a whole lot going on with them from the top down. And then on top of all of that, I don't love what their schedule is. I mean, they're in conference schedule. They're at South Carolina. They're at Georgia. They host Texas. They're at Auburn. They host Florida. So their in conference schedule is not doing them any favors. And then, of course, out of conference, they get Louisville, who absolutely decimated them last year. It's another hard out of conference opponent. My number 14 team is Missouri. And Brian, you and I could not see this more similarly. They took a step back last season compared to what they did in 2023, and that was even when they had Brady Cook and Luther Burton. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Bo Pribula. I've said this to you before. I think I've said it on the show. The Bo Pribula situation, it really reminds me of the Blake Bell situation at Oklahoma from 2012 to 2013. Blake Bell was kind of their big red zone quarterback that they would use in short yardage and goal line situations. And he had 11 and 12 rushing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons in 2011 and 2012. Then he took over as the full-time starter in 2013 and it didn't pan out as well. And then they made him a tight end. Bo Pribula, that situation is eerily similar. So that combined with what their in-conference schedule is, I mean, Missouri gets South Carolina, they get Alabama, they're on the road against Auburn, they get Texas A&M, they're on the road against Arkansas, and they're also on the road against Oklahoma. I think it's going to be a tough road for Missouri in quarterback play. To your point earlier, Brian, when you have a good quarterback in the SEC and when you get good quarterback play in the SEC, that tends to bode well for your program as a whole. I just don't know if Missouri is going to have that this fall. My number 13 team is Vanderbilt. And again, another team that we see very similar. They finished last season 3-5 in conference, but I think that win over Alabama really clouded people's vision of what Vanderbilt actually was. They still finished the season 6-6, and they were still in the conference under 500. I think people kind of have this misguided view of what Diego Pavia was. Brian, to your point, once they got film on him, he stopped performing as well. I mean, in his final games against Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, and Tennessee, he didn't have a completion percentage above 55%. He started to struggle. And for as good of a runner that he was, I mean, some weeks he got relatively shut down. I mean, against Auburn on the road, He had 12 carries for 26 yards. And as a passer, he went 9 of 22. Now, he had two passing touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over, but on his season as a whole, he was a 59.4% passer. I love Clark Lee, and I wish that Vanderbilt wasn't this low on my list because I really like Clark Lee. But now it's to your point that you brought up earlier about Vandy. They're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. And honestly, they stopped sneaking up on people last year. They are going to continue to battle. And even in their losses last year, they never really got completely blown out. But we are still talking about a team that in week 3 last year, they lost to Georgia State. And so I'm not that high on Vanderbilt. I have them as my 13th ranked team in the conference. And then coming in at number 12, I have Arkansas. They went 3-5 last season. I see them having a very similar in-conference season this year. They're good for kind of consistent with a lot of the other teams in the SEC. They're good for one of those, how did they win that game type of game last year? Last year it was Tennessee. This year, I think it could be another team that they have on their schedule. I'm very interested to see what Taylon Green does this year without Andrew Armstrong, Isaac Tesla, Isaiah Sategna, and Luke Hask. That is going to be really interesting to see what he does. Is he the type of quarterback that can put a team on his back and say, hey, I got this, or not? They also lost one of their starting running backs who also happened to be one of their top pass catchers last year. So I'm in line with you. I like their offense and defense, and that's a good foundation to any team. But it's going to come down to if Taylon Green can kind of be that guy in this offense for them, because that's going to be kind of what they need him to be this year. I like some of their talent. I think isn't Arkansas the team that picked up that Charlotte wide receiver, Omega Blake, on the all-name team
good
this
player.
year?
I mean, the name is cool, but he's a good football player. You watch the film, he's a good football player. And he fits. I mean, he's a guy that can stretch the field and do some of the things that Taylon Green is good at. And also, this is going to be Taylon Green's second year in the system, which is going to help as well. Second year knowing the team, knowing his teammates, and them knowing him as well.
Yep.
Before we move on to the next section, I got to say, too, you talk about Diego Pavia, and somebody in the chat, Jason Smith, mentioned this as well. I don't think he did himself any favors with how he kind of publicly talks either.
No.
And not just in like the media, but other SEC players are going to watch that SEC any given Saturday show. And he puts a big bullseye on his chest. And that was great when nobody really knew what they were about. But as you pointed out, once people had some film on him, it looked a whole lot different. And he just, like he has become very unlikable to me this offseason. Now, maybe he's always been this way. I didn't pay attention to him early last year because I didn't care, and watched him on the field. He's a scrappy player, gritty player, and all that. I enjoy watching him play, but I do just he presented himself very unlikable in his comments in that any given Saturday, but then also just some of his comments at like media day and on 3, and just I didn't go play in the Big Ten. What was his comment about the Big Ten? And I would play against really good teams or something like that.
He went on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, and they were, because it's ran by Taylor Lewan and Will Compton, 2 Big Ten guys. And they were asking if he got any phone calls from the Big Ten and the transfer portal. It's like, oh, you don't answer the phone when the Big Ten calls. This is the SEC. It's like, brother, you're at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you're not even the real SEC. Every other SEC fan wonders when they're going to kick you guys out of the league. And I would like to remind you who won the last 2 national championships. It was a team from the Big Ten. And it was just like, dude, know your audience a little bit too. Like, know who is thinking highly enough for you to have you on their show and to say something like that to them. It was just like, okay, this kid. And then you watch even his own teammates. And it was a little bit lighthearted in this, but you could tell that lineman was like getting a little bit sick of him. Like, dude, you don't even do nothing at practice. You know what I mean? Like, you just talk trash the whole time. I'm like, yeah, okay, that tracks. That tracks. So I mean, that stuff. It's like you're just adding fuel to your enemy, so to speak, when you conduct yourself that way.
Yeah, there's something about this offseason that middle of the road quarterbacks just kind of feel the need to talk out of their
right.
And
like, it's not Arch out here running his mouth. It's not DJ Lagway. It's not Garrett Nussmeier. It's not CJ Carr. It's not Bryce Underwood. It's not John Mateer. It's flipping Thomas Castellanos and Diego Pavia. It's like, seriously? You guys are the ones talking trash? You got benched for Grayson James. Pipe down. Go win a quarterback battle. Go, you know what I mean? Like go beat out the Florida State guy for the 2-10 team, and then you can come back and talk to me about, I'm the reason that they did. Well, all I know is the offense was better when they benched you. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, it's they both present themselves as very unlikable in that video. Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. They made the LSU head coach not the least likable guy in that production. Thought that was interesting. Let's get back to the predictions, Trev. Gonna go 7-11. The number 11 team for me this is a team that I think could end up being better than where I have them, and that's the Auburn Tigers. I look at this Auburn team, Trev, and there's a lot I like about this football team, and they've got some good talent coming back. I think you look at how the season finished for them, and I look at that Auburn team offensively late in the year, and they started to kind of show some signs of life late in the season. You look at, they had a 507-yard performance against Louisiana Monroe. They went for 469 and 6.5 yards per play against A&M. They had 399 yards against Bama, but went for 6.1 yards per play. They were 5.6 yards per play or better in each of their last 5 games. And only one of those games were they less than 6, and that was against Vanderbilt. They were 5.6. So they showed some flashes last season. of success. And I think when I look at their, what they've got coming in, I think Cam Coleman is going to be a breakout star for them this year. I know that's not a bold take because a lot of people think that. That's one of those ones where I'm going with the majority on this one because that's what the film tells me. I think getting Eric Singleton was a big pickup for them. I think Eric Singleton individually gets too much hype, like he's some elite player. But I think complementing Cam Coleman with Eric Singleton was masterful because they're very different players. And I think that combination is going to be outstanding, even though it's kind of like when you say a guy's overrated because you have him ranked in the top 5, but I think he should be more top 25. Technically, that's overrated, but it's not like I think Eric Singleton stinks. He's a very good football player. I just think when I'm watching him play and I'm watching Malachi Fields play, I'm wondering, why is this guy getting all the hype and this guy isn't? But different story for a different day. But I like their offensive line has a chance to be improved this year. I like their left tackle, but that they got in the transfer portal. I like they've got Damari Alston and Jeremiah Cobb are 2 up and coming running backs that were highly ranked players that I think have a shot to be solid players. Keldrick Falk's got a chance to I think he's got a chance to be a breakout player as a pass rusher. His production last year was impressive. I think he had 11 tackles for loss and 7 sacks, but his 7 sacks came in 4 games. He had 3 games of 2 and then a game of 1. So that meant that there were 8 games he didn't record a sack. And he only had 5, and all of his tackles for loss came in like 5 or 6 games. So like half the games he produced nothing. He's only a sophomore. So I think there's going to be more consistent production from him this season. I think he's got a chance to be a bit of a breakout player. They did have some portal pickups, but if you look at it, their portal pickups in a lot of instances are going to be more depth guys and a couple starters. It's not like they're completely remaking their team with portal players. And they've focused a lot on recruiting the high school level, and a lot of those guys they've recruited are now going to be stepping into the starting lineup. So they're going to be young this year, but they're going to be talented. And the key for them is going to be Jackson Arnold. If Jackson Arnold can be better than he was in the SEC last year, then Auburn is going to be better. They're going to finish higher than where I have them. I have them here because I am not bought into Jackson Arnold as like he played in this league last year and got benched for a reason. He was averaged, I think it was like 5.8 yards per attempt, 5.4, something like the yards per attempt. He's got to get a whole lot better for this team to take the next step, but they have weapons. And the thing that hurt Jackson Arnold last year at Oklahoma, if you're being fair, is their receiving core got devastated by injuries. So sometimes you wonder, like, was he that bad or did he just have nobody to throw to? We're going to find that out this year because he walked into a tough receiver situation, into one of the 3 or 4 best receiver situations in the SEC. And if the line can hold up, which I think they have a shot to do, I think this Auburn team could surprise some people. I think at the very least, even if they finish like 9-11, they're going to have a couple big upset wins. But with the way Hugh Freeze is as a coach, I also think they can have a couple games that they lose, and you're like, how did you beat that team but lose to that team? Like, I could see them upsetting Georgia. Like, seriously, I could see them upset Georgia on October 11th or upset Bama on November 29th, but then lose at Vanderbilt and then lose at Arkansas. Like, I could absolutely see that. The other thing that hurts Baylor this year is their schedule's not easy. At Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, at Arkansas, at Vandy, and then home games against Georgia, Missouri, and Alabama. And that's another thing that factors them down. But I'm one of the biggest locks that I have this year is that Auburn will have at least one huge upset this year. It's just, will they be consistently good? That's the big question for me. Number 10 is Tennessee. I'll just say it, Trev. I think Tennessee last year was a lot of smoke and mirrors. I do. And you look at what they lost, their offensive line took a step back with some of their losses, losing Dylan Sampson. Hurts to a degree, but I like their young running backs. I think they'll be okay there. I don't have a lot of faith in their receiving core to really get back to what they were a few years ago with Jalen Hyatt and that group that they had with him. I like Joey Garcia, or Joey Aguilar, but I think he's a good player. I don't think he's a great player. He's got to protect the ball a lot better. I think he had some big games at App State, and I like the pickup overall, but he also will force the ball, and he's going to have to limit the turnovers. But the big thing that concerns me about Tennessee, Trev, is their defense suffered a lot of blows last year, like from last year's team. They lost some really good players. I think Tim Banks did a heck of a job with that team last year. I think he was the driver of their success, but just personnel-wise, are they going to be able to get after the quarterback? Are some of the young players that are going in their second year is going to be able to take a step up? I just don't know if the defense – I still expect their defense, just so we're clear, they had some very big personnel losses. I still think their defense is the best part of their team. My question is it going to be good enough for them to win those 17-14 games like they won last year? Is it going to be good enough for them to outscore Oklahoma 25-15, beat Florida 23-17, beat Bama 24-17, beat Kentucky 28-18? Are they going to be good enough to win those games, or will some of those teams get that one extra touchdown a game because their offense is worse than it was last year, which is possible. It really is possible. And that's really the concern for me, is I just don't know if their defense has enough firepower to win those 19-14, 21-14 games like they did last year. And I don't know that their offense is going to be a whole lot better. This is a big year for Josh Heupel, who a lot of people view as an offensive guru. And we saw that in the Hendon Hooker years, but we haven't really seen that since. And this is a year where he's going to have to try to figure out how to get that going. But and then also when you look at their schedule, Trev, it's not a cakewalk of a schedule either. It's not like the gauntlet that LSU has, but it's not easy either. It's Georgia at home, at Mississippi State, home against Arkansas, at Bama, at Kentucky, home against Oklahoma, at Florida, home against Vanderbilt. Their schedule is enough to where they could go up a couple spots based on that. But I just think the Volunteers take a little bit of a dip this year compared to last year. Certainly, so they're a playoff team last year. I don't see that this year. Number 9 for me is the Oklahoma Sooners. Look, we don't know what's going on with John Mateer right now. And so we're not going to comment on that because we haven't been able to do enough research to know what's real, what's not real. Was he really making bets? Was he just being silly and sending stupid things? I don't have a clue. And so right now we're working with the assumption that John Mateer is going to be on the team this year, because it's just right now it's just a lot of speculation and a lot of that stuff, and we don't really get into that. So if there's something more concrete, we'll talk about it. But right now we're going to talk about John Mateer being part of this football team. And when I look at Oklahoma, Trev, the one thing that I understand a lot of the hype that Oklahoma's getting this year for one reason, and that is I think their defense is going to be very good, or at least has a chance to be very good. They have a lot of talent coming back. They have portal guys that are going into their second seasons, but they also have a lot of guys that they recruited to Oklahoma that are now becoming veterans. You've got the Bowen brothers. I think that Peyton Bowen's going to have a bounce-back year this year, look more like he did as a freshman. His brother has turned into be a really outstanding player. What's funny is everybody thought Peyton was the stud, but last year Eli was the better player at cornerback, and he's coming back. I think their linebackers have a shot to be good players. Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie. Their D-line's got to hold up. I think it's got the tools to do so. The question for me is going to be, can their receiver stay healthy and play a whole season? You got Deion Burks coming back, who they got last year from Purdue. Very talented player, but got hurt very early in the season. Played 5 games. What did he play? He played 3, 4, 5 games last year, got hurt. Year before at Purdue, he was 47 catches, 629 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I think he's a really good player. You talked about losing Arkansas losing Isaiah Satanga. Where'd he go? He's going to Oklahoma. He transferred to Oklahoma. So they've got a shot to have a better group of pass catchers, and their running back room is going to be loaded. I love Jade Knott. I think he's a heck of a player. He was banged up last year. He's healthy. Javante Barnes is a good player. Xavier Roberts is a big old boy. Taylor Tatum is a former big-time recruit. They got in Torrey Blaylock. They have a very deep running back room, very deep. The concern I have about Oklahoma, however, is the offensive line is still a major problem. And I worry about their strength program because you don't have that many injuries just by freak accident, I don't think. If you think Notre Dame's injury problems last year were bad, it doesn't even compare to what Oklahoma went through. Notre Dame had as many injuries on their team last year, big injuries. Oklahoma had a receiver basically last year. The key to Oklahoma is going to be their offense being able to make a quick transition and the ability to get the offensive line to finally start playing competent football. That killed their offense last year. their offensive line did. If that doesn't get better, it doesn't matter you have Jaden Ott. It doesn't matter that you have your court receivers are healthy. It doesn't matter that you have John Mateer. If you can't block people in the SEC, you're going to get beat. And then when you look at Oklahoma's schedule, that's not exactly a cakewalk either. It's like they said, okay, well, we're going to bring in these two Big 12 teams, and one of them we're going to give a fluff schedule to, the other one we're going to give a gauntlet to, and they pretty much gave Texas the fluffier schedule. And this is the schedule for Oklahoma. They have Auburn at home, Texas and Dallas, at South Carolina, home against Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, home against Missouri, home against LSU. If I was doing a power ranking, I would have Oklahoma higher than 9th. But I just don't think with the offensive line issues they have, I don't know that team can be higher than 7 to 9 with that schedule. If they had Missouri's schedule, they'd be higher on this list for me, because I think their roster's a lot better than Missouri's. I just think that the O-line issues and the schedule are why I have them a little lower, Trev. Number 18 for me, South Carolina Gamecocks. I know this was a real tough one for me. There's a couple reasons why, Trev. I have some questions about their offensive line. I think their offense last year was very up and down. Their defense was good last year. I do wonder if it's repeatable what they did last season. Their offense has to be more consistent. They rely a whole lot on Lenore Sellers. Their receiving core has names in it, but not proven production. Nick Harbor gets a lot of hype. Mazio Bennett gets a lot of hype. Neither of them have really produced a whole lot. I think Rocket Sanders was a very underrated part of that team last year, and he's gone. And you have the questions on the offensive line. So I think there's some questions I have about them. I also don't know if South Carolina is a team that's capable of being consistent. Nobody expected them to be as good as they were last year. Were they a flash in the pan, or is this the new normal? And because they have such a volatile head coach, I don't know that you can assume that they're going to be a consistent program, because they don't have a consistent head coach. And he's a smart guy. He's a hard worker. He's a great recruiter. There's a lot of things to like about Shane Beamer, but he's very emotional. And I've talked to people that have visited their practices and gone over, and they're like, it is a train wreck. Just not – you go there and then you go to other practices and it's night and day, and not in a good way. And that's kind of who Shane Beamer is. So unless he kind of grows up a little bit as a head coach, which doesn't often happen when you're 48, I can speak from experience on that one. You kind of are what you are. I just think the lack of consistency for South Carolina is going to be a bit of an issue. And then when you look at their schedule, Trev, it's not an easy schedule, that's for sure. They open up against Virginia Tech and Georgia. They play Vandy at home. Then you're at Missouri, home against Kentucky. Seems good so far, right? Okay, then you're at LSU, home against Oklahoma, home against Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, and then, of course, they're home against Clemson, which is a non-conference game. But I just think the schedule and some of the volatility of that team is, despite Lenore Sellers being a great player, is why I have the Gamecocks at 8. And then number 7 for me is the Florida Gators. And this is another team that it's all dependent upon their quarterback. And right now I'm assuming that their quarterback is healthy. If he's healthy, the Gators could finish 7-5, in my opinion. They're going to be really good along both lines. They have talent at receiver, just got to keep it healthy. And they're already getting banged up in fall camp again. Dallas Wilson's missed time. Eugene Wilson has missed time. They got to get those guys healthy. If Dallas Wilson, Eugene Wilson, and J. Michael Sturdivant can be healthy all season, that's a really good group of pass catchers for Florida to throw to. Really good running back duo back there. Their offense should be a lot better, Trev, but it all is going to come down to, can DJ Lagway be healthy and have a sophomore jump? I think their defense, again, it's the same thing. Can they stay healthy? They should have a really good defensive line. Caleb Banks is an absolute monster in the middle of that defense. And their secondary is going to be healthier this year. They should be better this season. That's still the question mark for me, is the secondary. That's still my big question mark. But they were like the receiving core last year, just banged up a lot. Can they stay healthy? Can they get back on track? I don't know. Front 7 should be pretty good, but the health of DJ Lagway and the secondary are my big question marks for Florida. But if he's healthy, they have a shot to finish anywhere from 5 to 7 this season. If not, then it could go south.
My number 11 team, and I think they're going to be kind of the biggest fallers in terms of, I think their stock is going to drop the most from last season to this season. It's Tennessee, for a host of different reasons. A lot of them Brian already covered. You lost a lot. I mean, we're talking about they lose SEC Offensive Player of the Year in Dylan Sampson. James Pierce is gone. They have to replace 4 offensive linemen. I'm just not sold on Joey Aguilar, if I'm being honest. He threw 14 picks against an Appalachian State schedule and is now going to be playing against teams like Georgia, Bama, Oklahoma, Florida. They went 6-2 in conference last season. I do not see them repeating that. But above all else, one of the things that makes me the most nervous about this team is, what is the locker room situation looking like? A lot of people were sold on the idea that someone like the locker room and the NIL issues were out the door with Nico. And the conversation was that this is either going to galvanize this team and they're going to band together and they're going to piece together a decent season, or it could lead to other problems. And I was under the impression that, yes, Nico is kind of the problem child in that locker room, but with stuff like money and NIL and the amount of money, it's rarely ever one person.
Right. I mean, Trev, even before Nico got there, you had the situation late in the year where a defensive player was getting in getting in Hendon Hooker's face about, all the hype he was getting. And then Joe Milton steps in and handles business, being the good backup quarterback. And this was there before Nico. And Nico being recruited the way he was is an indictment of the culture that Josh Heupel created.
Yep.
You allowed this to become the problem as the head football coach. Now you're trying to fix it. But to your point, that this has existed before Nico. Nico is just the greatest example of it, but it's not the only example of it. And hopefully he can get that turned around. I'm sorry to interject during your portion, but it frustrates me because it's been frustrating watching him build that team, because he's got potential as a coach, but I don't know that he knows how to build a culture.
Well, and that's my biggest concern with them. I mean, they lost some pieces. They lost some very key pieces. I'm not sold on the galvanization of this Tennessee roster. I got to see it, because there's been multiple examples of, after that defensive player left, that was giving Hendon Hooker a hard time. And will they step up then? Okay, well, now they got in Nico, and then that issue happened. And then we had the issue with one of the receivers, Brian, that just came out about the NIL money from Tennessee.
It was DB. Blue Carter's a DB.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that those issues go to rest, because I think Tennessee is one of those programs that college football as a whole is better when Tennessee is better. They're one of those programs to me. So I hope that they can get it figured out. But as of right now, heading into this season, I have them as my 11th team in conference. My number 10 team is Auburn. And they went 2-6 last season in conference. I do have them improve this year. Love their receiving core. I'm not going to break down that too much, but my questions, are also around the quarterback situation. That, and I don't know how much I trust Hugh Freeze.
Yeah,
but their quarterback, their quarterback situation to me is a big question mark. If Jackson Arnold can get it turned around, one, there will be no excuses this time if you're throwing to Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton. But if he doesn't, because what I factor into these rankings is I want to try and do my best to look in at both sides of the coin. If Jackson Arnold pans out, I think Auburn could finish the year higher than 10. And to Brian's point, I think they're going to come away this year with at least one big upset win where you're like, whoa, did not see that coming. My biggest concern, though, is if Jackson Arnold doesn't work out, then who are you turning to? You either turn to Ashton Daniels, who's the transfer from Stanford, and we saw what he does.
He can't throw. He needs to play another position. He can't throw.
Exactly. Or you turn to a true freshman in Deuce Knight, who has an extremely high upside. But when you have a schedule that consists of at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, home against Georgia, on the road against Arkansas, at Vandy, and home against Alabama for the Iron Bowl, that's not an ideal situation to truly break in an 18-year-old true freshman. So I have
especially
a lot of
raw one like Deuce.
Exactly.
Like,
somebody that will need a lot of grooming. Right. Yes. And then another absence from this team that not enough people are talking about. I think losing Jarquez Hunter is also a blow as well. Auburn was able to stay competitive in certain games because they were able to run the football to some degree, because Peyton Thorne last year for them at quarterback was just not it. But losing Jarquez Hunter is also losing him is a big it's a big blow for them. At the top, I don't hate their defense, honestly, and who they bring back. But 9 of their 11 players in the 2 deep are either transfers or true freshmen. So it's more so the depth on the roster that make me a little bit questionable about their defensive capabilities.
The youth. Yep.
And the same could be said about the 3 deep. 9 of their 11 players in the 3 deep are also either transfers or true freshmen. And so that could work out. I'm not blind to that fact either, because you have a lot of homegrown kids or players going into their second or third year in the Auburn defense to kind of help bring along some of the youth and transfer portal players. But the depth is a question mark for me on defense. My number 9 team is Ole Miss, and they were 5-3 last season. I have them a hair under that this year. I really like Austin Simmons. I think their wide receiver play takes a step back. I think Caden Lee is going to be a dude, but they're replacing guys like Trey Harris with Harrison Wallace from Penn State. I think their D-line and linebackers should be solid.
At least he doesn't have to go against Notre Dame secondary. Sorry.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point.
Sorry. I couldn't help myself.
Have to. I get Harrison Wallace's first catch in an Ole Miss uniform will be one more catch than what he had in the Orange Bowl. But I think Ole Miss's D-line and linebackers should be pretty solid. But I do have questions about their secondary. Every single projected starter in their secondary is currently a transfer portal player. Now, we've talked before on this show, when it's a position like the secondary, it's not as big of a concern as it is for like offensive line per se, when everything is made up of transfer portal players. But with that being said, when I mean every transfer portal, or when I mean every position in the secondary, I mean every position in the secondary. Field corner, boundary corner, nickel corner, field safety, boundary safety. All of them are transfers. And so if they can get them to come together and play well as a unit, I'm not going to be as concerned, but it is still a concern. I go through and I look at Ole Miss's schedule, their in-conference schedule this year. It's not, to your point about like LSU schedule or South Carolina schedule being a little difficult, it's not to that degree, but you still get LSU at home. You're on the road against Georgia. You're on the road against Oklahoma. You're home against South Carolina. And then you get Florida. They are going to be helped out by the fact that they do get Mississippi State and Kentucky on the same schedule. Both of those games are away, but having what we believe 2 bottom-tier teams in the SEC on your schedule is definitely going to help your cause. I think Austin Simmons is going to have a good year this year. And then, like I said, I think Caden Lee is also going to have a big year, but I'm going to be interested to see what they do this upcoming year without some of the impact players that they had last year. And then getting into my number 8 team, I have Oklahoma. 2-6 in conference last season. I think that they take a step up. I am confident that they will be better this upcoming season if they're able to remain healthy. Now, like you said, don't really know what's going on with the whole John Mateer situation, but if he's a part of the team, the combination of John Mateer and Jaden Ott lining up in that backfield, that might be one of the most dynamic quarterback running back duos in the SEC. I don't say that lightly, considering we know what type of player DJ Lagway can be. I'm very high on Lenore Sellers. Marcel Reed returns behind a very experienced offensive line and a host of running backs. But Jaden Ott and John Mateer could be one of the more dynamic 1-2 quarterback running back punches in this league. Be very interested to see what happens with them. For me, when I look at Oklahoma, this comes down to how competitive are you in bigger conference games. You go and look at what they did last year in 2024. They lost to Texas by 31. They lost to South Carolina by 26. They lost to Ole Miss by 12, and they lost to LSU by 20. And so it comes down to the situation of like, what is this? What's the real Oklahoma team? Are you the one that held the Alabama offense to 3 total points? Yes, I know that Jalen Milroe had issues throwing. He also had those same issues throwing against LSU, and he rushed for 4 touchdowns. And so the Oklahoma defense last year, to Brian's point, proved that they can be legitimate. But can you consistently be that? The consistency level with Oklahoma is going to be huge for them this year. But if they're able to bring it all together, I really like what they can be. Their schedule this year in conference doesn't get easier. They have Texas, South Carolina, Alabama, and LSU. But I do think that they pull off an upset on the road in conference in October. So I'm going to be interested to see how that pans out. But Oklahoma right now, they got to be able to stay healthy. But if they are, I love the pieces that they have. And so that'll be very interesting to see what they do. Number 7.
A road game in October or a neutral site game in October?
Maybe it's
I think it's a specific game in mind.
I do have a position game in mind, or a position game, a specific game.
I thought you meant specific.
I do have a position game in mind, Brian. But
I'm curious. What game are you referring to?
The South Carolina game.
Oh, nice. That is a road game. I didn't know because it was either that or the A&M or the
Mm-hmm.
Texas game in Dallas, and I was curious. Okay, ooh, I like that. Okay,
Mm-hmm. I think that one's going to be
okay.
fun. But so my number 7 team to kind of round out this portion, I have Florida. Last season they went 4-4 in conference. I think they're going to come pretty close to repeating what they did. I do think though that Florida kind of has some of the most variance for me because of the questions of health I have about DJ Lagway. I could see them rising or falling. There are some teams on this list that when I looked at them and when I went through this conference breakdown, I was like, this is kind of the lowest I see them. Ole Miss, this is the absolute lowest that I see them.
That's how I was with
Oklahoma.
Tennessee.
Yep.
I'm predicting the worst case for Tennessee this season.
Yep. Ole Miss, I'm predicting their worst case scenario. Florida, they could rise or fall either way, and neither one would surprise me. But look, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to what DJ Lagway does from a health perspective. He's already shown that he's injury prone. Up until he shows me that he can, I'm not confident in his abilities to show that he can finish a full season. And they need a lot from him. If they are able to repeat what they did in conference last year, I think that's still a good year for Billy Napier considering what their schedule is. They're at LSU, they get Texas, they're at Texas A&M, they get Georgia, they're at Ole Miss, they play Tennessee, and that's including having out of conference games against Florida State and Miami as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do there. I like their offensive line. They return 89 career starts. Jake Slaughter is one of the better interior offensive linemen in the conference. They also have good experience on their front seven. I like the linebackers they have coming back. Both of their edge rushers come back. And then, like you said, the kid that's the force in the middle of their defense also returns. But Florida, I don't want to just make it about one guy, but you go and look back at the Georgia game, that's kind of a microcosm of what their season was. With DJ Lagway, that's a really effective team. Without DJ Lagway, not a lot behind it. And so I hope that he's able to stay healthy because if he is, this Florida team will probably be higher than the initial ranking that I'm giving them right now. But until I see it, that's where he's going to be.
Here's my thoughts on DJ Lagway being healthy. I think if DJ Lagway is healthy, the floor for Florida is about 8th. The ceiling is about 5th. I don't think that they're maybe 4th. I don't think they're a team that's like, contender for the league. But I will say this: if he misses a good chunk of the year, I think their floor bottoms out into the 10 or like outside of like they wouldn't be in this range. If he misses like half the year, they're not in this ranking. They're in the 12 to 16, in my opinion. Like he's that important because of what's coming up. I mean, what are you going to turn to Harrison Bailey? I don't think that's going to go well. That's a problem. All right, let's go to we're going to do 4 in the next group, and then we're going to do our final 2. I've got Ole Miss number 6, Trevin, and I had a tough time with Ole Miss. I could see Ole Miss being as low as you had them. I could see them being in the top 4. I think their ceiling is a little lower this year than it was last year because of so much turnover. They have a lot of turnover up front, a lot of turnover at wide receiver, a lot of turnover on defense. And what really, like, the offense was good last year, but it was also very inconsistent last season. What drove Ole Miss's success for a good chunk of the year, in my opinion, was the play of their defense. Their defense last year for chunks of the season was outstanding. They only gave up 14.4 points per game last year. And they lost games giving up 20 points. They lost a game giving up 29 points, and that included an overtime score. And then they gave up 24 points in a loss. Like they beat Georgia. They held Georgia to 10 points. They held Oklahoma to 14 points. South Carolina to 3 points. They held Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, South Carolina, all to single digits. And then, they played Duke in the postseason, held them to 20. The only team that really moved the ball on them consistently and put up a bunch of points last year in regulation was Arkansas, a game they won by 32. So I think their defense was good, but they lost a lot from that defense, Trev. And you mentioned the secondary being completely turned over, but they also lost Walter Nolan from last year. Like that team is having to turn over a lot from their defense last season. And I don't know how they're going to be able to overcome that, to be honest with you. And I think that combined with some of the question marks on the offensive side of the ball, replacing, Caden Lee, I think is going to be a question mark. The big thing for them is they need DeJon Stribling from Oklahoma State to be what I think he can be. If he can have sort of the success in that system that I think he can have, they're going to end up finishing higher than what I have them. I think they're loaded at running back. They're going to be really good at running back. I feel like with Ole Miss, I have them a little bit lower than I thought I was going to have them this season. And, part of it's their schedule. Their schedule's kind of middle of the road. It's not hard. It's not easy. They get Kentucky on the road, home against Arkansas, home against LSU, but then they're at Georgia, at Oklahoma, but then they get South Carolina at home. They get Florida at home, and then they play at Mississippi State. That's not a brutal schedule, but it's not an easy one either. And it's just a lot of questions with Ole Miss. And then, Austin Simmons being a first-time quarterback, there's some teams with first-time quarterbacks that I don't think the quarterback's going to hurt them. I'm not worried about who Notre Dame's starting quarterback is going to be because of what's around them. I look at Ohio State's starting quarterback. I'm not worried about what he's going to be, Julian Sand, because of what's around him. Ty Simpson at Alabama, because of what's around him. I can't say the same for Austin Simmons because there are some question marks about what's around him. And so I think that's kind of where I look at them and say, I'm not as high on them this season as I was actually I wasn't that high on them last year either, but they were better than what I thought they're going to be last year. This year, I'm just too many losses on defense and at receiver for me to think that they're going to repeat. Plus, I think the teams ahead of them are pretty good. If I was predicting, I'd say if I'm wrong on Ole Miss, I think I'll be wrong in the direction of they're not as good as even I have them. I think this could be a bit of a rebuilding year for Ole Miss. I really do. Even though I do like their quarterback quite a bit, Austin Simmons. And if I'm wrong on my predicting them to be lower, it'll be because he's a beast. That'll be why. Number 5 for me is the LSU Tigers. I had a tough time with LSU because I have LSU 5. I could see LSU finishing lower than this. I told you that with Tennessee, I gave Tennessee the worst case scenario. With LSU, I'm going kind of with a little bit of best case scenario. They play Florida at home. They play South Carolina at home. They play Texas A&M at home, Arkansas at home. They've got to hold serve at home, and they haven't really been able to do that under Brian Kelly as much as they should, honestly. And he had a lot of success at home at Notre Dame. But, last year LSU got blown out at home by Alabama. In his first year at LSU, they got blown out at home by Tennessee. If you remember that game, giving up 40 points, scoring 13. They held serve at home in 2023 because their home schedule was pretty soft, but they almost got beat by Arkansas at home 2 years ago, if you remember that, Trev. I look at just this year, the road contest for them, Ole Miss on the road, Vandy on the road, Alabama on the road, Oklahoma on the road. If LSU's not 5th, I could see them being lower. I really could. I just have a hard time when I look at a rebuild defensive line, a rebuilt offensive line. Their receivers are going to be very good, but they're always very good. Combined with one of the tougher schedules in the SEC is really why this isn't a shot at Brian Kelly. There's too many question marks in the trenches, and that schedule is brutal. That's why I just have a tough time seeing LSU being higher than 5th. I think their ceiling is probably 4th, at best 3rd for me, just because of the schedule. If they had Tennessee schedule, Missouri schedule, I think you could make a case for LSU being 2 to 3 in the SEC this year. But their schedule is just, it's really rough. I'm going to say that Florida, at Ole Miss, home against South Carolina, at Vandy, home against Texas A&M, at Bama, home against Arkansas, at Oklahoma. I think that's a really tough schedule. I do. I think it's a really tough schedule. And I think it's going to keep them out, which means if they're 5-3 in the league, they better have a win over Clemson in the non-conference. I could see a world in which, and we'll talk about this more on Saturday, but I could see a world in which Ole Miss or against where LSU can lose 3 conference games. Let's say they lose at home in a barn burner to A&M. Let's say they get beat at Ole Miss and lose to Alabama, where if they have wins at Oklahoma, wins at Clemson, win over Florida, that you could be saying they have a much better 9-3 case for the playoffs than what Alabama and Ole Miss had last year because of their schedule. So that's why that first game is going to be so important in my opinion, because they're in conference. If they lose that game to Clemson, it's going to be hard for them to have less than 2 losses in their league play. So that's why I have the Tigers 5th. And the camp injury, it's not long term, but it's a little bit of worry with Garrett Nussmeier for me. Number 4 is the Texas A&M Aggies. Trevor, I'm a lot higher on Texas A&M this year than a lot of people seem to be, and I think it's the reasons why. It's the year 2 effect for Mike Elko. I think he's a darn good football coach. And the other thing too is you hear me say a lot. What's a primary concern for a lot of the teams that I have concerns about? It's the trenches. And when I look at Texas A&M, I think they're going to be trenches, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They have one of the best returning offensive lines in the country. They have a great backfield coming back. The receiving core now fits more of what Colin Klein likes. He does. Last year had those big guys he inherited. That's not what his system requires. He wants quickness and speed, and that's what he has now. I think their offense should be a lot better now. I think Marcel Reed's a solid player, but he's a great fit for that system. But he won't have to be counted on as much to carry that team as much as he did this year. And I don't think their defense takes a step back that some people think that they do. I think they had they're not going to be as physically gifted on the D-line this year, but I'm willing to bet you a steak dinner, Trevor, that their defensive line is actually going to be more steady this year than it was last year. Maybe not as sexy, won't be as flashy, but just more steady. Where that D-line last year was incredible, and there was other games where I didn't think that D-line wanted to be there. And I think this D-line is going to be a little bit grittier, a little bit hungrier, a little bit more consistent, and I love their linebackers and their secondary. I do. I think Will Lee is a heck of a player. They've got one of the better returning linebacker duos in the country with Torian York and I'm completely drawing a blank. Scooby Williams. I kept wanting to say Solomon Williams, but he plays for another SEC team. Scooby Williams. I think they're outstanding players, and I like this football team, and their schedule's challenging, but it's challenging in a way that I think works well for them. They get Auburn at home, they get Florida at home, they get South Carolina at home. They do have to play at Texas, they have to play at LSU, but their other 2 road games are very winnable games for them, at Arkansas and at Missouri. So you could see them lose to at LSU and at Texas and then beat Auburn at home, beat Mississippi State at home, beat Florida at home, beat South Carolina at home, beat Missouri at home, and beat Arkansas at home, or on the road, I should say. So I just think it's a tough schedule, but it's not like brutal. And I just think this A&M team is a lot steadier than maybe people are giving them credit for. So that's why I have them number 4. And then number 3, Trev, because this is going to give away who's going to be in my top 2, the Texas Longhorns. I get that they're the chic team, right? They're the trendy pick. They're the team that everybody loves, and there's reasons for it. Steve Sarkisian's an offensive genius. He absolutely is. Arch Manning's a very talented player. They have very talented receivers, but they are counting on a lot of young players this season on defense, on offense. They've got major question marks on the offensive line to me. They've got legit questions on the defensive line outside of Colin Simmons. Their secondary is talented, but has some important pieces that need to step up. I think Texas is very good. I just think that people are putting a little bit too much on them this season. And then when you look at their schedule, they've got to play at Florida. They've got to play Oklahoma on a neutral field. They've got to play at Georgia. And then you've got a home game against Texas A&M. I just think when I look at this team, I think there's a chance for 2 losses on their schedule this year in the regular season. I do. And I could be wrong about that, but I'm not as high on Texas as other people are. I'm good with Texas being ranked in the top 5 preseason, but because of what they've done and the talent, Sark and all that. But I think they're going to stub their toe a couple times. And what that's going to do, here's my long-term prediction though. What that's going to do is that means a lot of guys that may go pro are going to come back in 2026. And that's when I think Texas is going to, like, the hype that Texas is getting now is what I think they would deserve next season after a bit of a step back year, because all those young players, Wingo's now a junior, Emmett Mosey's now a junior. Their line's going to have a lot of guys coming back next year. Colin Simmons is going into his junior year. I think that's the team that's going to be more dangerous in 2026, not this team. And that's why but this team is still going to be good, Trev. I still have them 3rd. And then Yeah, that's my 3-6.
My number 6 team, I went with their floor, and I have the Texas A&M Aggies. There's a lot of things that I love about this team. Outside of just the fact that they're on Notre Dame's schedule, it's year 2 of the Mike Elko era. 3 of their last 4 conference games are tough. At LSU, South Carolina, at Texas, and then with a road game against Missouri sprinkled in there as well. But I love the potential of what their offense could be heading into year 2 of the Colin Klein era. To Brian's point, I think their wide receivers fit what they want to do more. They have a very experienced offensive line coming back. They have 120 combined career starts. I think they have the best running back room in the SEC. They have one of the best in the country. Marcel Reed had a full offseason to prep as the starter. I do think he's key. Where I do agree with you, Brian, I don't think that he's going to have to put the team on his shoulders again like he did last season, but I do still think the offense will still have to run through him. It just won't look like what it did last year.
He doesn't need to be a star. He just needs to not make the big mistakes and get the ball to his playmakers, and then use your legs to make some plays. He doesn't have to be, Vince Young. He doesn't have to be,
Sure.
Like he can be like sort of a different style, but like what Will Howard was last year for Ohio State, where he didn't have to be a star, but I'm talking in a regular season. Just get the ball where it's supposed to go to, and don't turn it over. And then when your legs or opportunities for your legs are there, use them.
Yep. Absolutely. It's just can Marcel Reed kind of build off of some of his successes from last year, because there were moments in games, and there were some games where he performed really well, but overall as a starting quarterback at Texas A&M, he's like 1-5. And so it's who's the real Marcel Reed? Is it the flashes in the pan that we saw against LSU? But again, that win over LSU, that 15-point win, he threw 2 passes. So that's interesting. It's interesting to see where he's going to fall, what he's going to look like. But at the end of the season, they lose by 24 points to South Carolina. They lost to Auburn in 4 overtimes. They only scored 1 offensive touchdown against Texas. He's going to have to do a better job of taking care of the football down the stretch. He had 6 interceptions last season, and all 6 of them came in the last 5 games. And so I think some of those numbers will naturally decrease since he won't be asked to be the Superman in that offense. But still a piece of me that has to see it. I'm confident in the pieces that they have. But
although I don't blame him for why they lost to Auburn. That wasn't on him.
No, that wasn't.
The offense did their part. The defense
when you score 41 offensive points, you should probably walk away with a dub. I agree completely. I think their success, though, and I don't think their defense is going to take as big of a step back as what people think, but they need to find a way to play more consistently on defense. And that's consistent through the entire year. I mean, you go back through and you look at what Texas A&M did last year, especially down the stretch. They hold LSU to 23 points. They win by 15, but then you give up 44 the next week to South Carolina. Then you hold New Mexico State to 3 points, and then you give up 43 to Auburn. Yes, you lost to Texas. That's not really on the defense. The defense held them to 17 points at home. And then in the bowl game against USC, they give up 35 points.
That's my point. Their defense was schizophrenic last year, because I just think there were some weeks the D-line just didn't care. Like Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner.
Nick Stewart.
Scorton wasn't as dominant last year as he should have been. There just were weeks where you're like, dude, they have talent, but I have no clue what they're doing. No clue what they're doing.
Agreed completely. And a lot of their success, I think, is going to come down to what other cornerback steps up alongside Will Lee. Love their linebackers with Scooby Williams and Torian York. I think their D-line is going to play with a much more consistent motor this upcoming season than kind of the flashy, sexy, NFL draft pick players that they had last year, where it's like, hey, if they're just not feeling it this week, they're just not feeling it. Yeah. But if somebody else can step up alongside Will Lee, as long as one of Julian Humphrey or Des Ricks steps up, then I think this defense is going to be just fine. I like the safeties that they have coming back. It's a solid group, but that's what it comes down to for me for Texas A&M. Number 5 is LSU, and I have LSU and Texas A&M separated by 1 game this year that I could see going either way, and it's because they face each other. But LSU last season in conference went 5-3. I had them a smidge better, but I did the same thing as Brian. I went with kind of best case scenario. I wanted to stay consistent with how I've been talking about LSU this offseason. When we did our post-spring rankings, I kind of went with best case scenario for LSU. I'm staying on track with that now for the conference rankings. On offense, are they going to be able to run the football? That's what it comes down to. Like Garrett Nussmeier, he's going to be a gunslinger. He's going to turn the football over. Has to get a little bit more consistent with like physical pressure in his face. That's going to be tough to do with a rebuild offensive line. But when I look at this offense, they're going to have to find some way to run the football. They were number 107 in the country last year in yards per game with 116.38 yards per game. And they were number 84 in the country in yards per carry at 4.06. I like Caden Durham, but he's going to have to perform and start to live up to expectations a little bit, and so is the offensive line. Completely rebuild offensive line. That's going to be interesting to see what they do. I like the individual pieces on their receiving core and what they have coming back. I think they may be putting a little bit too much emphasis on the transfers, but hopefully they're able to, one, remain healthy. You know, Nick Anderson had a season-ending injury last year. Hopefully he's able to come back healthy. But the receiving core, for me, it's not as big of a concern. I like the skill talent
They're
there.
always good there. They were good there last year when they lost 4 games. They were good there the year before that when they were elite there, and when they lost 3 games in 22 and 23. Like
Exactly. And so the biggest question for LSU, especially with who they have on their schedule this year, can the defense finally learn how to defend against mobile quarterbacks? When I look at their schedule, they struggled against mobile quarterbacks last season, and it does not get easier this year. They play Florida, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. If they haven't figured out by now how to defend a mobile quarterback, it's going to be another long season for them.
It's going to be a long year. Yes.
Because it's just like that. And as crazy as it is to sound, like that's kind of what has been their Achilles heel. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's if they're
Which is
able
crazy because
to,
they practiced against an elite mobile quarterback for like 2 years.
It had to have just been something like, we're not going to face anybody as good as Jaden.
Could you imagine what he was like in practice against this defense in 22 and 23?
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I bet it was absolutely
a great
nuts.
observation, though, Trevor, about their inability to stop mobile quarterbacks and then what their schedule looks like this year. Tremendous point.
It's just that's what makes me nervous for them, because even if they figure out a way to run the football, even if their receivers pan out and their offensive line pans out and Garrett Nussmeier does a better job of taking care of the football, I don't know if I trust that unit enough to win a shootout week after week after week after week if they can't stop mobile quarterbacks. So LSU is my number 5 team. My number 4 team is South Carolina. Again, consistent with who I believe the offensive player of the year is going to be in that conference as well, with Lenora Sellers. A lot of the questions are valid, but I love how they ended last season. They ended the regular season last year on a 6-game win streak with wins over Oklahoma on the road, Texas A&M, Missouri, and then on the road against Clemson in what was honestly one of the uglier college football games of last season, but walked away with a win against a ranked opponent that went on to go and win the ACC. So I take that into consideration as well. Like I said, Lenore Sellers is my offensive player of the year in the conference. He's a lethal dual threat player, but I also agree with Brian. It comes down to his health. It wouldn't be right for me to talk about Florida's season hangs in the balance of the health of DJ Lagway, but Lenore Sellers is going to be just fine. Because of his play style, it's a little bit more intriguing to see if he's going to stay healthy. One of the positives, though, is after that injury, it took him a couple games to kind of get back to true form, but he then remained healthy for the rest of the regular season, was a big part of their turnaround, and I haven't heard anything in comparison to what we've heard about DJ Lagway this offseason as far as injuries go, but they do have a tough schedule where he is going to have to find a way to stay healthy. I mean, they get at Missouri, they're at LSU, they get Oklahoma, they get Alabama, they're on the road against Ole Miss and on the road against Texas A&M. So they're going to be facing some pretty good defenses as well. But yeah, I'm with you. Nick Harbor's an interesting player to talk about. He's going to have to break out this year. All of the physical specs are off the charts. People are talking about how he runs a sub 4.3 and he's 6'5" and he's almost 240 pounds. Well, that's fantastic, but that now has to turn into production. I think there was also a reason why their tight end was their leading receiver last season, and it wasn't Nick Harbor. So he is going to have to step up in this offense to be what he is kind of being hyped up to be. And then Can they replace a big piece of what they lost on defense? I think Dylan Stewart is going to be a dude, like what we talked about for your defensive player of the year. I agree completely, and I think the two obvious choices in the SEC conference is Colin Simmons and Dylan Stewart. On the flip side, however, of what you were talking about, what is Dylan Stewart going to be able to do now that he isn't lining up opposite of Kyle Kennard? I'm going to be
Brian
interested
Thomas
to see how
is going to have to
yes.
step up. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Brian Thomas is going to have to be that guy. Brian Thomas doesn't have to be Kyle Kennard. Brian Thomas just has to be what Dylan Stewart was last year as a true freshman to take some pressure off of him. Because we've seen teams before in the past be able to key in on one specific guy. We saw it in 2022 with Isaiah Foskey at Notre Dame. When the offensive line in a blocking scheme can just focus on one person, it makes it a much more effective operation. And so that's my only question about Dylan Stewart, but I think he as a player is a dog. But I'm going to be interested to see what the strategy is to replace Kyle Kennard. But South Carolina is another one of those teams that I took the ceiling of what they can be. I don't see them going higher than fourth. Some of that is just because of the teams in front of them, but that's where I have South Carolina. My number 3 team is Georgia, which again kind of gives away who my 1 and 2 teams are. Not the order, but still. Georgia last season in conference, they went 6-2. I see them repeating that this year. It's interesting because they have a lot of similar opponents that they had on the schedule last season, but I think they have a more favorable schedule in terms of the quality of the teams that they're going to be playing, because I don't think Tennessee is going to be at the same level of what they were. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be the same level of what they were last year. Here's the question with Georgia. Since they have a more favorable schedule, but I do think they have less talent on the roster this season, specifically on defense, than they did last season, which one takes the day? Is it the schedule or is it the less talent on the overall roster? That's going to be something I'm really interested to follow as the season goes along. They still have Tennessee, Bama, Ole Miss, Florida, Texas, but their out-of-conference schedule is a little bit more favorable. They don't have Clemson. And now they beat the brakes out of Clemson last year, but they don't have that Clemson-level opponent in the out-of-conference this upcoming season. Can Gunnar Stockton be what Kirby Smart thinks that he can be? I think that he can be, because he's the style of quarterback that Kirby Smart has won with before in the past. Jake Fromm, Stetson Bennett, players like that. He's more along the lines of them than he was Carson Beck or Jacob Eason or Justin Fields, who ended up transferring. And so that's going to be big for Georgia this year. Can they get back to running the football? Excuse me. Can they be a vintage Georgia running the football team? Can they get back to having vintage offensive line play? That's going to be huge for them, for their offensive success. And then their receiving core, to be honest with you, I don't really see it getting much worse than it was last year, considering they led all of college football in drops last year. That is something that I'll be paying attention to. They're going to have some guys step up. Zachariah Branch is going to have to be essentially what his recruiting and transfer portal ranking is, not just the name. It's time now. You're going into your junior year of college. It's time to be that guy that you were expected to be back in 2023. But again, my biggest question with this team is still defense. Can they replace what they lost on defense? I think that question is overlooked by the fact that they return guys like KJ Bolden and CJ Allen, but they still lost Malachi Starks, Jalen Walker, Smell Munden, Chaz Chambliss, Nazir Stackhouse, Damon Wilson, Dan Jackson. They lost a lot of pieces from that defense from last year. And I think that's going to start to show up because Georgia can't walk into some of these conference games anymore and just say, hey, we just have the better roster. Now, where I put a lot of weight into them is they still have Kirby Smart, and I think that he is one of the best coaches, active coaches in college football right now. And so can he get this unit to perform above what they have on their roster? And I don't want to paint this picture like they have like a terrible roster. It's not bad. I think they're going to be the third best team in the SEC for a reason. It's just not what we're used to seeing from a Georgia roster. So that's why I have them at number 3.
It's interesting, Trevor, as we get ready to reveal our final 2, how much different my perception of teams when I look at their rosters compared to other teams changes when you have to factor in who they play and where they play. I would have told you before the year that there's no way I'm going to have Georgia in my SEC championship game. Just no way, because I don't think they have one of the two best rosters. But then you break down the schedule, to your point, and you look at it and realize, like, okay, their schedule is favorable. It's tough. Don't get me wrong. It's a very tough schedule. But for a team like Georgia, when you get those games at home, they're more often than not going to be wins. And because I don't see Tennessee as being as good as they were last year. So your three toughest games you get at home and in your conference, which is very interesting. And that's where I'll begin. My championship game matchup is Bama, Georgia, which will be a rematch that I have Georgia winning in the regular season, actually. So that is one of Bama's losses this year, is I have them losing to Georgia. Here's my thing on Georgia. I do think that their receiver play is going to be better. I don't know if it's going to be as better as people think. I don't think that their offensive line is going to be that much better than it was last year, but it as far as dominance, but I think it'll be more consistent as long as it's healthy. Part of the issue they had last year was just the lineup was constantly changing. And defensively, they're still going to be very good on the defensive line. They're just not going to be elite like they've been in the past. Love their linebacker room. Dalen Everett has a chance to be a stud player. You know, you lose Malachi Starks, you insert KJ Bolden, you're going to be okay. My bigger question is the other safety in replacing Dan Jackson, and how do they do that? And then, of course, they're going to have to upgrade over Daniel Harris. But I like this Georgia team. I just don't love this Georgia team like they have in the past. They're still a very good top 10 team. But when I look at their question marks compared to others, it really comes down to, I think their line play is still going to be good. I think Gunnar Stockton is the key for me. I think Gunnar Stockton is not going to turn the ball over as much as Carson Beck did in some very key situations. And I think he better fits what they want to be, or what they not want to be, what they need to be offensively. And Mike Bobo last year kept trying to be Todd Monken, and he's not Todd Monken. He needs to be a guy who has a team that runs the football and then builds the offense around the ability to run the football. And I think they're going to try to do that more. If the offensive line can be more consistent, I think they'll be okay in that regard. And then, of course, you're going to see the offense built around Gunnar Stockton more this year than it was last year, because last year he was running the Carson Beck offense. Now it's going to be the entire offseason of being built around him. And I think that's going to benefit them. And their defense is still going to be very good. I don't think it's dominant it's been in the past, but it's going to be very good. But the SEC is going to have to prove to me they can go into Athens and beat Georgia. That's the problem. Like, Alabama needed to hang on for dear life to beat Georgia last year in Tuscaloosa. I don't have a lot of faith that Ole Miss is going to be able to go into Athens and beat them. And I don't have a lot of faith that Texas couldn't beat them in Austin or Atlanta last year. They got to prove to me that they can beat Georgia toe-to-toe. Is Texas capable talent-wise of going into Athens and beating Georgia? Of course. But they've got to prove to me that they are physical enough and tough enough physically and mentally to play Georgia, because last year they showed me that they weren't. And so that's something that I think they need to see. And then when you look at their non-conference games, or they played Florida in Jacksonville. That's a series they've dominated lately. And they play at Tennessee, who I just got done saying, I don't think they're going to be very good this year. So I think the schedule, I texted this to you before we got started, Trevor. The rest of their schedule is home against Kentucky, at Auburn, at Mississippi State. That's the rest of their conference schedule. I said to you, as I study it and look through it, like really dive into it, it's like, I don't think their schedule is as tough as I thought it was. Because I just look at the teams, Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, and it's like, yeah, but they get them all at home. So I'm not sure how that was going to pan out. So I don't think that I think their schedule's more favorable than Texas is by a little bit at the top. And that's why I have Georgia. I think Texas has probably the better team, but their schedule's a tad tougher based on home versus away, and the fact that Texas has to prove to me they can actually beat Georgia. So if Texas and Georgia have the same record and Georgia wins in Athens, then Georgia gets the tiebreaker and they're in the conference title game. That's how I see it. Then my number one team is Alabama. Trev, I've been on the Alabama sort of bounce back hype train for a while now. You know that. There's a lot of reasons for it. I think there was some addition by subtraction this offseason with guys who weren't bought into what they're trying to do. A huge addition is getting Ryan Grubbs back. I think that was big. I love the Isaiah Horton pickup. Their offensive line should be one of the 10 best in college football. We can debate, are they top 3 or are they top 7 or 8? Either way, that's still really good. I think they're going to be good there. Their defense late in the year last year got a lot better, and this is going to be a big key for Alabama. Was their defense under Kane Womack, did they just get better, or did they just not play any good offenses? Obviously they struggled a little bit against LSU. Not against LSU. Against Auburn, they gave up 399 points or yards and 6.1 yards per play, but only gave up 14 points in that game. They shut out Missouri. They dominated LSU. They dominated Mercer, as they should. Their defense only gave up 325 yards to Oklahoma, but 257 of it were rushing yards. And then Michigan only had 190 yards and 2.9 yards per play. They didn't lose that game because of their defense. I also look at that and say there weren't a whole lot of good offenses they played either. So I'm still a little shaky on just how good is their defense. It's getting a ton of hype. Great D-line, great linebackers, great secondary. It should be good in all those places. I don't know if it's elite, and that's going to determine. I'm banking on at least one of those positions being elite and then the other two being pretty good. And I also think that year 2 of Kalen DeBoer learning this roster and the roster learning him are factors why I see Alabama being a better team. And then when you look at it, the final piece is the quarterback. Is Jalen Milroe more talented than Ty Simpson? By 1,000 miles. Was Jalen Milroe a bad fit for this offense? Absolutely. And I think Ty Simpson is a much better fit. He's a coach's kid. I've said it before. Coach's kid. He's accurate. He's got a nice arm. He's a solid athlete. He's a gamer. He reminds me a little bit in body type and style of play of Stetson Bennett. Not an elite player, but he's going to get the ball where it needs to go to. And that's what Stetson Bennett did. He wasn't like this elite talent that could do for Georgia what Trevor Lawrence did in 2019 against Ohio State, where he's just like, okay, guys dropping balls, can't get open, can't run the ball, fine, I'm going to do it by myself. I just think of like that scene in what was it? Oh gosh, what movie was it? But where Thanos grabs the gauntlet, he's like, I'm fine, I'm gonna do this myself. You know what I mean? Like that's what Trevor had to do. Ty Simpson won't have to do that. If Ty Simpson falters, and I'm not predicting he will, you're turning to either Austin Mack or Keelan Russell, who are way more physically gifted. There's a reason Ty Simpson won this battle, Trevor, and it's because Kalen DeBoer is looking for a point guard. He's saying, I've got an elite receiving core. I've got a very good offensive line coming back, and we've got a defense that can shut people down. I need a quarterback that's not going to get us beat, and he's going to get the ball to the playmakers. They're not going to look like 2023 Washington. They're going to look like a team that's going to control the trenches and get the ball to the skill players from a design standpoint, and then the quarterback's got to read it and hit it. And I think that's what they're going to do. They're the most balanced team in the SEC this year. They're the team, in my opinion, that has the fewest holes in the SEC this year. And that's why I think Alabama is going to, in fact, be the best team in the SEC this year. Their schedule is got some challenging games in it. Obviously, at South Carolina won't be easy. At Georgia won't be easy. At Missouri won't be easy. I think they win it. And then they've got home games against Tennessee and LSU and Oklahoma. That's not an easy schedule, but it's also not a brutal schedule either. There's no Texas on their schedule. There's no Texas A&M on their schedule. There's no Ole Miss on their schedule. Of course, they're at Auburn at the end of the year. And I just think it's a manageable schedule for this team. And I feel really sorry for Vanderbilt because I just have a feeling that it's going to be some major payback in that game this year. And they're going to, I think, beat Vanderbilt pretty good. But I like this team, Trevor. I think last year was an anomaly. Kalen DeBoer did not forget how to coach football. I just think it's one of those years where you were replacing a legend. There were some players on that team who didn't want to buy into what you were trying to do because it wasn't what the legend wanted to do. Those guys are mostly gone now. Anyone who wasn't bought in would have transferred or gone pro. And so I just think this Bama team is going to be a lot better than they were last year. And like I said, part of it's my opinion of Kalen DeBoer based on what he's done everywhere he's been. And I think we're going to see that again this year. And I also think the fit at the quarterback. So this is why Bama's my number 1 seed. And they are my conference champion because I have them beating Georgia in a rematch. I have Georgia winning the regular season game in Athens, and then I have Bama winning the rematch. So that's my conference championship prediction for the SEC.
My conference championship prediction, and I'm sure by process of elimination, you guys figured it out. I have number 2 Texas versus number 1 Alabama. I had a really hard time when I was breaking down Texas because there's been so much talk about how good this team is, and they have the best quarterback room and the best receiver room and the best O-line and the best D-line and the best linebacker room and the best coach and the best secondary. And it was really hard for me to kind of take off the fan hat and just kind of pick apart Texas completely and be like, I know that they're not going to be this good. How good actually is Texas? And when I look at Texas, one, I look at their schedule. We've talked about it throughout this show. I think Texas is going to be significantly helped out by what their schedule is. There's no Alabama. There's no LSU. There's no South Carolina. They also get Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and Kentucky on their conference schedule as well. They do still have on the road in Athens. They still have Florida in the Swamp, and they do still get Texas A&M at home at the end of the season. And so it is not a cupcake schedule by any means, but when you don't have what we believe to be, 3 of the top 5 to 6 teams in the SEC on your schedule, that's pretty favorable, if you ask me. You still get Oklahoma and the Red River, so that one will be an interesting game as well. That's one that Texas has kind of held its own in recent years over, course of about a decade. Rivalry games are also just a little bit different, but when I look at Texas, I want to really evaluate the pieces that they have and their talent. The ceiling of the talent that they have is really promising. To Brian's point about maybe some of the hype that they're getting in the 25 season really should be geared more towards the 26 season. But I do like Steve Sarkisian as the head coach. I don't think he's the second best coach in college football like what some people make him out to be, but I do think that he's still a heck of a coach and a coach that I think can do a good amount with a certain level of talent. The questions that I have, one is the obvious one. We can get it out of the way. Can Arch Manning be that guy? And when I mean be that guy, I don't mean be the guy that the media outlets are making him out to be. I don't mean can Arch Manning be the best quarterback in college football history? Can he be the next whoever, insert player here? Can he be better than Quinn Ewers? I think that's a valid conversation because Quinn Ewers was kind of what held them back in certain games last season. Can he be better than that? Can he be a solid first-year starter? Can Arch Manning be to Texas what C.J. Carr or Kenny Minchie can be to Notre Dame? Can he be what Ty Simpson is going to be to Alabama? Can he be what Julian Sayin is to Ohio State? I think those are very valid questions. Their offensive line is really an intriguing conversation for me because I think that's going to hold the key to success for Texas's offense. I think it could go one of two ways. I think the amount of what they have to replace could be a little bit too much to overcome. But on the flip side, could they also make the jump that Notre Dame's offensive line did from 23 to 24? You're replacing it with new people. Notre Dame's offensive line returned returned basically 6 combined career starts. They lost Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, a first and second round NFL draft pick. That's a similar situation to what Texas has going on right now, especially after losing Kelvin Banks. Can they play more cohesively as a unit and fall more in line with what we believe Texas A&M's D-line is going to do this upcoming season with losing some of its star talent and do what Notre Dame's offensive line did from 23 to 24? Or does the volume of their replacements kind of weigh them down a little bit? Be very interested to see what happens there. To be honest with you, I'm not crazy worried about their front 7 on defense. I don't see them taking a major step back. I have questions about their secondary being able to replace Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba. I think it's just a little bit too much of a cop-out to say, there you have Malik Muhammad. They're going to be just fine. It's like, just fine? I mean, yeah, you return Michael Taffy and Malik Muhammad, but losing Andrew Makuba and Jahdae Barron are pretty big losses. So I don't know if they'll be just fine. But I think as the season goes on and those inexperienced players start to get their feet under them a little bit more, I view Texas as being one of those teams that you don't want to play as the season progresses. And the more experience that a lot of these starters get, I think is going to bode well for them. So I have them as my number 2 team. And then for all of the reasons that Brian talked about, I have Alabama as my number 1. Year 2 of the DeBoer era, I think, is going to be huge. That's why he's both of our coaches of the year. They have an experienced offensive line. They return 84 career starts. They officially named Ty Simpson as the starter, I think yesterday. He's a better fit for the offense. And Ryan Grubbs is a great fit coming back. They have the best receiving core in the conference with Ryan Williams, Isaiah Horton, Jeremy Bernard. Biggest question for me on offense is, are they going to be able to run the football? Their rushing offense last year was Jalen Milroe. Is that going to benefit them? Or is that going to put them in a spot where it's like, okay, what are you going to do from a run game perspective? Because I think that they lost their better running back to the transfer portal in Justice Haynes. Jam Miller's a good back. Is he going to be a good 3-down running back with not a mobile quarterback to kind of help support him? That I'm not sure of. I don't think it's going to completely derail the offense if they're not rushing,
especially
for
since that's not what.
Game.
Yeah, I mean, like Washington made the championship game 2 years ago, averaging like less than $120, I think, rushing yards per game. 2023 they averaged 118.4 yards per game and played for the title.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But some other questions that I have, the great point. I think this receiving core is very comparable to the Washington receiving core that they had with Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze and some of those pieces. But I don't know what Ty Simpson is going to do in comparison to what Michael Penix did for that team. I don't know if they're going to put up comparable numbers. And I do think in a league like the SEC, you have to be able to run the football to some degree. And so that's my one question mark for them on offense. Again, to both of our points, they don't have to rush for 200 yards a game. I'm just going to be interested to see what their rushing offense looks like without Jalen Milroe and now Justice Haynes, who I believe to be the better of the two. The defense, it just comes down to consistency. This does not have to be a vintage Alabama defense for them to win the SEC. I truly don't believe that. It doesn't have to be the 2012 Alabama defense. It doesn't have to be the 2020 Alabama defense. But you have to find some level of consistency. Last season they gave up 34 to Georgia, 40 to Vandy, 24 to a dormant Tennessee offense, and 24 to Oklahoma. But then on the flip side, they also only allowed 13 points to LSU, 10 to Wisconsin. They shut out Missouri, and they held Auburn to 14 points. And so can you find some level of consistency between getting 30 to 40 balled and shutting teams out? What can that defense do in the second year under this new regime? That I'm interested to see. But overall, Brian, you and I see that the same. I think that Alabama has the most – I think they have the less amount of holes to fill in comparison to the other teams in the league. And I also have Alabama winning the SEC as well.
It's going to be a very interesting year, Trev, because I could see 3 to 4 teams winning the SEC. 3 teams that we have at the top. I think there's a very clear top 3. I think Alabama, Texas, and Georgia are head and shoulders above everybody else in the SEC, in my opinion. And I don't know that like where they are. If like I see a drop off. However, with the way the SEC is, there's always that team that kind of can sneak out of nowhere and have that breakout year that surprise you. And all you got to do is get into the dance, and with the schedule imbalance the way that it is now compared to the past years, where in the past it was every SEC West team had a tough schedule. Everyone, because you had to play Bama. And if you were Bama, you had to play LSU, you had to play A&M, you had to play Ole Miss, you had to play Mississippi State when they were good under Dan Mullen. You had to play those teams. You had to play Auburn every year. Now it's not quite the same. You may have years where this team has a tough schedule, this team has an easier schedule, and it kind of goes that way. So those are things that I look at and view as what makes the SEC, I think, potentially really entertaining this year. But I do think there's 3 teams at the top that are going to be the best. But I think I think of all the leagues, the Big 12 and the SEC are the 2 where I think the predictions could be the most off because of the variance in schedule and there's so many question marks at key positions, offensive line, defensive line, quarterback in this league. It's going to make it very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
It's going to be a fun year, that is for sure. And I think the SEC is going to be right in the middle of that discussion because the level of play down there I expect to be a little bit higher than what it was from a season ago. But listen, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Really good discussion today surrounding the SEC. We are going to continue and pick back up with the conference breakdowns on Thursday. Tomorrow we have buy, sell, hold, where Brian and I will be back to answer your questions. The thread's already up on the message boards. See it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen. So make sure to get your buy, sell, hold submissions in. Before you guys head out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Be sure here in about an hour, the guys go live on IB Nation Sports Beat. They're going to be talking some wide receiver talk, which I know has been a hot topic of discussion this offseason. So be sure to hop over and check them out as well. Until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.